the stream. He said, "This is gold." See, we're doing something good here. So let's see. I wonder if Joe says, Joe can hear us, right? Joe, you can hear us? You're on. So are you able to, if we talk a little bit, do I need to record that to tweet it out? Or are you able to like clip it and tweet it out and I can retweet it to give people a little preview of like what this is all about and what the purpose of this is? You can do it? Okay. So we can just talk and you'll just like cut a little video of it and before this starts at 10 and I could tweet it? I think that's yes.
Are you talking to him on the phone?
No, he hears us. So I'm talking to him and then he's all right. Hi guys. So Joe, yes to that. We could just start talking and you could clip it, like video record it or clip it into a little clip and then we can put that out there to invite people in. Yeah, yes, he said yes. Okay, cool. So like I said, Nick, I mean, we've been offlining a lot about some really important topics and every time there's a big legal sports story, a lot of those times we sort of reach out to each other to have that larger discussion. And I feel like it would be so special to be able to not only share the important discussions around these stories, why they're important, you know, the broader discussion of their larger meaning in society and how they can actually not only educate people, but inform people with the public at large, but also invite the public into that discussion. And so we were talking a little bit about this congressional roundtable that's about to live stream at 10 o'clock, so in about 20 minutes. And former employees from the Washington football team are going to be telling representatives their experiences in the workplace with what they say was, you know, sexual harassment or just harassment in general. And we were talking about, you there, Nick? Yeah, there you are. So we were talking about, you know, why this is important just to the average person. I mean, some people may not care about the Washington football team. Some people may, but why is this important to somebody who's just going in every day to their workplace? And you had some really interesting points there. And I said, you know, people should be able to go to work every day, be respected, work with dignity. And what happens when they find themselves in a really tough position? What can they do? And part of this roundtable today in Congress is to come up with legislative solutions. So if people join the discussion today and talk with us, I can actually share this with Representative Maloney's people, and they can use this public discussion for ideas. I think there will be some great ideas. So we're giving people an opportunity to get involved in the process, in the lawmaking process, by coming into the discussion.
Well, that's the biggest part, one of having this platform, but also being able to, take a bird's eye view into the congressional hearing is because there's a lot of individuals who are dealing with a lot of these situations that we're talking about. Now, today is just dealing with the Washington football team, but let's just say that you are a paralegal working in an office somewhere and you have been harassed in a certain way and you don't know where to turn, who to talk to. What other resources are there out there for you to help yourself get out of this situation? Because when we see a lot of these things happen, Amy, is the idea that, well, am I the only person going through this situation? And the idea is like, no, yeah, you're not the only person. There are other people who are going through it, but they don't know how to go about handling it. So the idea of having, discussion today is to allow people to understand, well, you're not the only person going through this situation. There are other people and there are groups that you can kind of, go to if you want relief, if you're trying to figure things out, you can get advice. Maybe you pay for it, maybe it's free. You just don't know. But the idea is making sure that everyone comes together to get this information. So if it's not happening to you and it's happening to someone else that you know, now you can go back and help them, because the idea for me It's all about everyone living the best life that they can, but it's hard to do that when you have workplace stress. And if you have workplace stress, you tend to take that home, and no one really wants to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were even talking about how this is not a simple situation if you find yourself stuck in it. This can be complicated. Like you said, do you go to HR and who does HR answer to? What if the person who's targeting you or making your work life miserable is an executive or is the owner of the company? What's HR really going to do? And then the idea of if you go outside of the company, you know, are you going to lose your job? Some people really value their job. Some people have worked really hard to get to where they are. They might like their job, the people they work with. So they have this choice of, do I leave my job or do I just put up with it? And sometimes people choose to put up with it. And then there's that whole idea of if you do complain, are you going to get a reputation for being difficult? Are you in an industry where people talk to each other? Right? You're laughing, but
Yeah.
it's true, right? There's like the
No, no,
pressure
no.
of like now everyone's going to know I'm a troublemaker, but I'm not the one doing it. It's being done to me. And then like, am I going to get hired by other companies because now people are talking about me as, as raising hell just to like stand up for my rights? But people deserve to be respected in the workplace.
Well, but Amy, the reason I laugh is because so many people are dealing with this very thing. It's like something that's happened to me. If I go to human resources, I'm going to be labeled as that person. And
Right.
once that label and that stigma is placed on you, it's like, well, what do you do? And there's so many people who they may not like the work environment, but they love the people they work with. They love what they do. And like you said, it's so important. You spend so much of your time, moving your career forward. Now you reach this roadblock, this hurdle, something that's happening internally that can affect your livelihood and how you kind of feed your family. But now you don't know what to do. You're between a rock and a hard place. So if I say something, I get labeled. If I don't, I have to continue to endure this nonsensical things that are happening to me. And what happens in that case, because you're not speaking up, the idea is that, well, no one's complaining, so let's continue with the same type of office and environment. And that's where you find yourself in a difficult place as an employee.
Right. Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's going to be mentioned today too is this idea of a non-disclosure agreement. If you become an employee of a private company, especially, a lot of times you have to sign these employment contracts. Some of them we've discovered have arbitration clauses. Like, okay, if you end up having something happen to you at the company, it has to be confidentially arbitrated. So people feel that, they if they sign the non-disclosure agreement for a settlement or if they arbitrate something, they can never come forward with their story. They can't, some people feel, and this isn't true actually in some states, some people feel if something criminal was done to them, they can't report that. A lot of states say you cannot sign away your rights to participate in criminal investigations or report that. But a lot of people don't know. They think, okay, I signed the confidentiality clause and now, I got a little money, but now my career's ruined, or like I can't speak out about what happened to me. And not being able to communicate what happened to you is in itself a form of punishment that a lot of people have to suffer, just feeling like you're silenced. So the Representative Maloney and some of these congressional representatives that are concerned about non-disclosure agreements that some of the former Washington football team cheerleaders supposedly had to sign as part of their settlements, they've asked the NFL, they've asked the team, release these people from their non-disclosure agreements so they can come forward with their stories now that this is such a public event.
Well, it is very difficult, and there's a lot of legal gymnastics that everyone has to jump through. But those NDAs is like one of those things that, man, it closes the case, but doesn't really resolve the issue because no one's really finding out the details of what really took place. And I think, not every information is for public consumption, but when it comes to issues like this, and there's an accusation, there's a victim, and we need to find out, the true details of what's actually taking place because in a lot of situations, and not the one with just the one with the Washington football team, NDAs are signed and now maybe there's a settlement, but we don't know the details of what really happened. And we're trying to separate fact from fiction, right from wrong. and trying to hold individuals accountable. But sometimes, with those NDAs, we never really find out the details of what really took place.
Yeah. And I think what's so great about this roundtable is, they're doing their own congressional investigation, and they've asked the NFL, the people up in Congress, to hand over the findings of the Washington football team investigation. Supposedly 150 people or so were interviewed, and there was a fine on the team, $10 million, dollars, and admissions of an unhealthy workplace, sexual harassment, things that were going on, but we don't have any details. And so if you don't have the details, how do you start coming up with the solutions, or how do you know that things have been changed internally? So it's interesting that they're using this session separate and apart from that investigation to try to hear about that specific incident at the Washington football team and the people that sort of lived in that and experienced that environment, but using it to inform their creation of legislative solutions, to go to the drawing table and use their powers to make law, to say what can we put into the law that can protect people. And that's a form of relief. How can we create laws that give people an avenue when they feel that they're going through things, to be able to report it, to not be silenced, to not have retribution against them? A very, very important thing. Retaliation can not only be emotionally stressful, but it can destroy, a person's motivation and a person's career prospects.
Well, that's the reason I feel as though this whole thing with Washington football team is so important, is because what do you do in these situations? And maybe there's something legal, some policies that come into place, and not just the Washington football team, but just throughout corporate America, that now everyone has to abide by. And I get it. Everyone feels as though, hey, this is my own private company. I want to do things my way. But if there's something going on internally that is affecting maybe the cohesiveness of the company, then I think someone should step in and make sure that everyone has the rights and the privileges that anyone else, and kind of has an opportunity to enjoy. And that's why when you look around, I mean, there have been so many diversity and inclusion departments and hires and consultants, because there is an inherent issue. And anytime you have to do that, you are acknowledging that there is somewhat of an issue. But I want everyone to have the ability to live their best life. You should be able to walk into any work environment, feel safe, and if something happens to you, you should have an outlet where you can actually voice your opinion, because no one should feel as though they're trapped into this box. I mean, and I can't get out. I know my family needs this revenue for us to survive, but if I say something now, it's going to jeopardize my employment. That's a tough spot to be in.
Absolutely. We're about to start. This is the first time we're doing something like this. So it's really exciting because we can bring people into the conversation, totally interactive. Plus, we're live streaming in real time this roundtable, and we can react to it. And then everybody can react with us. We can hear experiences from people who have been through something like this. If you want to share your experiences, please come and do it if you feel comfortable, because I think through experiences and through hearing from people that went through it, that's how we learn what could have helped you in that situation. And then that's how we move forward into creating, workplaces where people feel safe and, like you said, can strive to be their best versions of themselves. Because if you're going to work every single day, and let's say you're leaving your family, or you're not doing the fun things that you want, and you're putting yourself into your job every day, that should pay off for you. That's your hard work, that's your time, that's your life, like you said. And so you should have an opportunity to be the best version of yourself at the company that you devote yourself to. So right now, I've got, you can knock. I just want to explain to people, you can chat to us on the side with your comments. If you don't want to come on the stream, you can just hang out and listen to what we're saying. Or you can actually knock and say, hey, like, I want to come on screen with my video, with my audio, and I want to join the discussion. Super awesome. I have a knock, but bear with us because it's the first time I'm doing this. So there may be some technical things. The hearing is about to start in 7 minutes. We have Megan Imbert, who was a former Washington football team employee, who's going to join the discussion. She knows everything about the whole scandal. She's in touch with the people who saw the supposed nude videos of the cheerleaders that were allegedly taken by the video department. She's been a real outspoken advocate for change in the workplace, not only surrounding this Washington football team scandal, but just in general. So we've got No Filter Network who's providing incredible support here. I just want to make sure we're all set for when this starts so that everybody can participate. So let's see, I could share the screen after the hearing starts. Okay, let's see. So there we go. So let's see if this fixed the problem. So I've got a knock on the door. There you go. So now we can see each other side by side. Now, I got a knock on the door. Let's see if we can get Megan in here. I'm going to do a search for her. This is very cool.
You know, every time you say knock, I think about Paul McCartney and his group Wings.
Now, you're going to start singing for us?
No, 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 God, no, no. The idea is to make this fun and interactive. You don't want to send people
Not
away.
to make people leave the chat.
No, no. So I'm not going to sing at all.
So let's see. Oh, I got Megan in there. So that was easy. Hi, Megan.
Hey there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you know, I'm going to deal with some welcome to our interactive chat.
I got to make sure I'm showing off my hoodie.
Yes.
Oh boy.
And I apologize. I was late. It was obviously an emotional morning too. So Nick, good to see you again. Amy, thank you for hosting.
Good to see you.
And I want to have you guys maybe talk a little bit, and then I'm going to figure out some technical stuff. So Nick, you're my co-host here, so I'm going to hand the baton over to you. Or the mic.
Well, Megan, once again, thank you for joining us. Let me see. What does that say on your sweatshirt? Oh, okay. Okay. Yes,
A
yes.
release.
Nick, you know, this is a day and age where you're not just an activist, you're a merchandiser as well.
Yeah, so you get the merch right there.
And if anyone's on Twitter right now, they'll see my lawyer, Lisa Banks, just tweeted a photo of all of our witnesses with their shirts. They're not obviously going to wear that today, but they have their picture they just posted with the release, the report.
I can find that.
Well, Megan, before you joined, Amy and I, we were talking about, why should other individuals be concerned about this? And I know it just seemed as though this is the issue with Washington football team, but tell everyone, why should they be concerned about this issue themselves?
Yeah, so what we experienced at the Washington football team was not only harassment, but bullying, intimidation, discrimination, everything from pay to treatment. And we've had a lot of conversations as Congress has been involved. Why is this taking up Congress's time? The NFL is one of the most prominent workplaces, and it's so ingrained in our society. We also have young people, young boys, young women that aspire to either work in sports, play in sports. And the NFL is really a microcosm of society. And I think when we look at the behavior and the treatment, it's just such a massive issue that we can't sweep this kind of behavior under the rug. And the NFL does receive some benefit from Congress as well. So they should be held to a bit of a higher standard in a sense. And when you look, like even the holidays, I couldn't get away from NFL. Like anywhere you look, there was a game, and it's been really, really hard, especially the past 20 months of just hearing about it, being around it. Even this week on work calls, people are talking about the team name change, not knowing my past and my background working at the team. So in essence, it's something that really impacts all work environments. The treatment of men and women, especially in natures of harassment, the abuse. The HBO released the podcast last night. I don't know if everyone had a chance to listen to that. I've been really physically sick after hearing that, and I've known about those stories, and those were only bits and pieces of things. I had over an hour interview with HBO, and at the end was my little clip, not even an experience. It's just kind of how I think the whole thing's been a sham. So all in all, it's really impactful for everybody to care about the workplace environments that they're in. And just because you didn't experience something doesn't mean someone else did as well. Sorry, I'm going to go off on my tangent. I'm a little emotional this morning.
Great. You know what? I think that the hearing might be starting. So I'm just, I'm tweeting this out so that people can get in on this discussion. You can join on video and audio and interact with us. So I want people to know that if you have something to say, if you want to join the discussion, you can just knock. Oh, you know what? I've got two knocks here. Let's see. I'm not seeing anyone in the queue, but I will fix that. So let me bring in the live stream because I think we're about to start. So I'm going to share my screen. Their entire screen. See if changing my layout works there. Their entire screen. There we go. This is fascinating that, like I said, we can watch something live together, comment on it in real time, and then bring the public into the discussion. I think that's really fascinating. We actually have 13 people here, so that's pretty good.
Well, that's
And I would
awesome.
love to hear, as the hearing goes on, what people suggest can be done to make the workplace just a safer environment and a happier environment too, and a more fruitful environment for people.
Well, how about this for something? How about treating every person as an equal? That's one place to start. How about that?
Absolutely. And that's something that you can teach your children if you have children as a parent, or even, teach people that you mentor that might look up to you, not just in the workplace, but in life. Everybody should be treated with respect. I don't care what the person's occupation is. I don't care if somebody's, serving you something at a restaurant, if somebody's picking up your trash, if somebody's a doctor, if somebody's a lawyer, if somebody's an athlete. We're all people, right? We all have hearts, we all have souls, and we all have feelings. And so if you go through life disrespecting people, to be honest with you, I think that's only going to hurt you. And so if you go through life respecting people and treating everybody equally, then that's going to come back to you. And people are going to, that's your reputation. Like I always teach my children, your reputation is not what you think you are, but it's what people see you to be. So your actions and your words matter. And you have to treat everybody equally and with respect, because that's what it means to be a good person.
But this is why I thank Megan and other people like her for coming forth, because the idea is to bring awareness to the situation. Because in a lot of work environments, it is kind of a mentality that, well, this machine has been working this way for so long, so why would we allow someone else to come upset the apple cart? But the idea is that let's bring awareness to this issue, because so many people find themselves trapped and not knowing what to do. And then it just kind of something that sits on them emotionally, and they don't know how to deal with it. And then these individuals end up becoming depressed and not having somewhat of an outlet. So I'm hoping, Megan, that something positive comes out of this from a policy change. When you look at it, and you've been close to this situation, what are you hoping happens at the very end of this?
I absolutely think that there's going to be some policy related to this. I know that they're actively working on legislation related around NDAs and the use of NDAs. Outside of that, though, I think there's a number of things that could happen in the NFL in particular if there's investigations like this. Even look at what's going on right now with Brian that just came out around the head coaching
Brian
position.
Flores.
Yeah, they need a truly independent third party handling these things, because there's retaliation, there's people working at all facets of the league and involved. Um, we had full faith that there was going to be an independent investigation. So I think there's some protocols and some changes that need to happen for the integrity of the actual investigation. Otherwise, like, what's the purpose of bylaws too? Especially when there's standards for players, coaches, but what about owners? That's a big one too. And I definitely think that they'll look at legislation. At the end of this, I absolutely want Dan Snyder removed from owner. I would also like to see the report released. Without transparency, we can't have accountability. In addition to that, if there are crimes, then I absolutely want to see them be pursued. And Amy and I have talked extensively about this. I think those cheerleader explicit videos are criminal. I think it was a repeat project, and I absolutely want to see that move forward from a criminal perspective. And I'm so proud Tom Kercheval came out in that HBO podcast last night. He was anonymous. He was the the whole time that, we talked about it. What do we do? You have these videos, and he pushed forward, shared it with the Post. And then Brad Baker, they didn't know neither of them knew I was talking to either of them. And I was like, we got to do what's right here, that we know that this happened. And here we are. And so ultimately, I also think Roger Goodell and his handling of this and the cover up and using us as pawns and excuses as to not releasing the report is absolutely unacceptable. I would like to see the NFL the investigation needs to be investigated, and that's why we're here with Congress. And if it's Dan Snyder, Roger Goodell, other leaders, I believe Lisa Friel and other people have been silenced, the lead investigator at the league. So ultimately, I want accountability, and that might be jobs, that might be further court situations.
In fact, somebody came forward. It was released last night by the HBO Real Sports podcast for the first time. Early when there were a lot of leaks to the Washington Post and other outlets, there was somebody called Anonymous who had come forward and said, I worked for the Washington football team in the video department. I entered into this edit room. As I walk in, all of a sudden I see on the computer monitor bare breasts from some woman. And I say, what is this? What am I looking at here? And the person who's editing the video seems to be really uncomfortable and says, oh, these are outtakes from the cheerleader shoot. And this was put together at the direction of the owner. And so that person who had gone in and sort of seen not just the bare breast, but other body parts with the cheerleaders and this whole like nude pornographic video that was compiled allegedly for the owner or at the direction of the owner has never come forward. And then last night, his name's Tom Kercheval, and he decided to come forward publicly, put his name and face out there to say, what I saw was disturbing. It was despicable. And Megan and I have talked about the fact that it can be a crime if you intentionally film people without their knowledge, without their consent, their nudity, and then you go and you distribute that nudity, whether it's electronically, if you distribute it to more than a couple people, that could rise to the level of a felony. There are now revenge porn laws, and you think about revenge porn, sometimes people think, oh, well, that's an ex-boyfriend or a spouse that took pictures of me nude and then I broke up with them, so they distributed that. No, it doesn't just apply to that situation. It can apply really to any electronic distribution that's intentional of somebody's nudity, to try to hurt them, to try to get money from them. So there could be a possibility, now that you have more people coming forward and giving their names and willing to cooperate and willing to testify, to get to the bottom of where are these nude videos, how many of them are there, to try to substantiate that they in fact exist, that people saw them, and then speak to those people, whether it's they speak voluntarily or you subpoena them or you compel them to speak in a criminal investigation, to get to the bottom of were people's rights violated here. I mean, this isn't a man-woman thing, right, Nick? It's like if somebody filmed you nude and then, hey, look at Nick Ferguson. I filmed him nude and he doesn't know, and then sends it to all their friends. That's extremely violative. I don't care if you're a man or a woman or who you are.
Well, it's all about the level of consent that someone else has, especially when it pertains to something relative to your body, your personality, and your brand. So it is a difficult situation. I'm hoping that so many things are brought to the surface. But Megan, here's something I've been thinking about for a while. And, in today's environment that we live in, now there's this term called cancel culture. And when we look at what you guys are proposing with the evidence and the allegations that you have, someone has viewed this as, well, this is just a bunch of people just trying to use that whole idea of cancel culture to now target, the Washington football team and Daniel Snyder. For those individuals who think like that, I mean, what do you say to them?
I appreciate that question because we've talked about this before. We're not calling for cancel culture. We're calling for the culture to evolve. If society is going to move forward where we actually embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion, then we absolutely need to recognize what are the mistakes, what are the issues. Do we have people in leadership privileged positions? Like, it should be an honor to be an owner of an NFL team. It should be an honor to be a head coach. We need to evaluate where we are, where are we trying to go as an organization, as a society. So I have never called for cancel culture. Yes, have I stopped watching the games? Absolutely. But that's just relative to what's going on right now. If they release the report and we really start to see accountability, I would love to be a fan again. A lot of us were, you know, so it's time for the culture to evolve and for people to be really accountable for their actions.
So actually, Congress is a little bit late. This was supposed to start at 10 o'clock. It's now 10:09. I do see activity right now for the first time, so I'm going to try to share the stream. I was saying, Megan, that people who join the conversation with us,
Hmm.
and we're recording this, and as we're hearing people, share your, if you want to share your experiences, great. If you just want to share solutions, ideas that you have, this is an opportunity for the public to come to the table, and we can then take this recording, share it with the representatives, and your ideas can actually inform their legislative solutions. So when you talk about, oh, there's these problems, and everything's up on Capitol Hill, the decision makers are up there, they decide what types of solutions to implement and how that's done. And really, I just feel helpless. All I can do is sit here, and maybe I could tweet or complain about it. But I can't be part of the solution. Now you can be part of the solution. You can come on here, you can say your ideas, we will share them with Congress, and your voice will be heard as they're trying to come up with new legislative solutions to fix the workplace, to make it a safer place for men and women, for people, different races, sex, sexual orientation, gender, religion. This applies across the board. A lot of times people aren't just harassed because they're a man or a woman, but because of their race or because of their sexual orientation or because of their religion. And it's completely unacceptable. In the day and age that we live in, it's just not to be tolerated anymore. And that's why I think we're seeing, especially with high profile places like the NFL or high profile people in positions of power, that's why we're seeing people being held accountable and a lot of people coming forward because people are tired of it. I mean, as you said, Megan, with the Brian Flores suit now, these claims of racial discrimination in the hiring process at the NFL. And guess what? Less than 24 hours later, there's a lot of coaches, a lot of high profile coaches out on social media saying, this happened to me too. I've got the receipts. You've got Marvin Lewis coming out saying that he feels that he didn't get a fair shot with the Carolina Panthers way back when he interviewed. You've got Hugh Jackson saying that he allegedly was also offered money to try to tank the team so that they could get access to the draft pick. So there's a lot of people coming forward saying to Brian Flores now, you're not the only one. I felt this way too. Of course, there needs to be investigation into what exactly happened in each circumstance. But I'm just saying this applies to people across the board. This Washington football team is an opportunity for everybody to talk about their personal experiences in the workplace and how can we make it so you can be your best self, so you can make your best life in the workplace.
I think also what's interesting about what you said, Amy, is think about the Gruden email leaks. That's what really brought this back into the forefront. We were really worried this whole conversation was really dead until those emails leaked. And what we know from them is that they contained racist, homophobic, misogynistic commentary, right? And that is between, a head coach or a team president at the time. Oh, I guess we're gonna get started here, huh?
Yeah, no, you can finish. I'm about to.
I was just, yeah, I was just gonna mention that
You're
this
absolutely
is
right.
another reason why we want the report to be released, because there could be more related to those emails that could impact the coaches, the players. We really just need to lift the whole can off of it.
For sure. So, all right. So I'm going to put the volume on now. You guys can see this, right? The live stream with Representative Carolyn Maloney up on Capitol Hill. And here we go.
Ultimately, there must be accountability for these actions. Back in 2014, when an NFL player was caught on video physically abusing his fiancée, the league's commissioner, Roger Goodell, said, and I quote, "The NFL is held to a higher standard, and properly so," end quote, given the league's prominent role in American society. But after 20 years of sexual harassment and abuse at the football team, the Washington football team, the team and the league have tried to sweep all this under the rug. After an investigation by a respected lawyer found rampant and serious abuses at the Washington football team, the NFL covered it up. In a break from recent precedent, the league refused to release a written report and let Mr. Snyder off with a fine and a slap on the wrist. That is why this committee, in partnership with Chairman Krishnamurthy and the Subcommittee on Economic and Consumer Policy, launched our investigation. As one of the most prominent workplaces in America, the NFL's attempt to cover up this conduct and avoid accountability sets a dangerous precedent for workplaces across the country. The committee has requested documents from the NFL so that we can finally learn the truth about what happened and why the NFL tried so hard to cover it up. But so far, we have been met with delays and finger pointing. I strongly urge the NFL to end its cover-up, fully cooperate with Congress, and immediately release the findings of their internal investigation. Even if the NFL refuses to act, it is my sincere hope the Washington football team will commit to stop using tactics like non-disclosure agreements, now and forever, to silence employees and conceal workplace misconduct. That is why this committee is exploring legislative solutions to rein in the use of non-disclosure agreements that prevent workers from speaking out about sexual harassment and discrimination in the workplace. We are also examining ways to promote accountability and strengthen protections for all workers. I now yield to my friend, Ranking Member Comer, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Americans across our nation are facing multiple crises today because of the Biden administration policies. Inflation is at a 40-year high. We're experiencing the worst border crisis.
All right, I'm just going to pause that for a second because it's a little off topic and bipartisan. So I guess this is a Republican person who's going after Biden's policies, COVID, all this stuff. But I think the point is, we're going to be hearing from people. You can see, very cool. Like, we feel like we're right there. We're live streaming it up on Capitol Hill. There are going to be people from the Washington football team. Megan, actually, the whole lineup. I have the list here, but maybe you can take us through. We'll go through and explain who each person is as they get up to talk. But do you want to sort of tell us who are the main critical people here that are going to be speaking and why they're so important and why it's important to hear from them?
Yeah, and I'm not sure the order, and I'm sorry. I know I'm going to be emotional throughout this because it's really hard. They're sitting right there. Sorry.
No, take your time. It's okay.
I knew what I was getting into, and I felt like it was important for people to see the human behind this stuff. I don't know how I would be today if I was there anyway. It'd probably be a little bit of a wreck. One of the most vocal people in this and critical is Melanie Coburn. She was with the team for over 14 years. She had a marketing job. She also participated very closely with the cheerleaders. She had been on those cheer shoots. She has seen a lot. She's been through a lot. She's going to be really, really critical here. And one of her best friends was former cheerleader Tiffany, who was featured in the HBO podcast for the first time on record last night about a direct allegation against Dan Snyder. I don't know Tiffany very well personally, but I'm just so glad that she has stepped forward and is willing to be here. Emily Applegate was our very first person to go on record. She worked for a short period of time within the marketing department, working directly for Mitch Gershman, who a lot of people have heard his name pop up here and there. She's been extremely vocal. She's actually started going to law school because of this situation. Then you have Rachel Engelston, who worked for the team, started like me. We never knew each other, but started as an intern. She ended up moving up the ranks into management. As far as I know, went and tried to escalate concerns that she had, and it really fell on deaf ears. And she grew up in Maryland, big diehard Redskin fan at the time. She's been extremely vocal. She also has an op-ed. Both her and Melanie have op-eds that people can look up outside of here. Anna recently came forward. I don't know her situation as much. I'm not as close to her, but she did go to New York City with Melanie to hand deliver the letters to the owners at the meeting that were since ignored. And probably most critical, at least to my heart, is Brad Baker, who was in the room when he heard the order about making the videos for Dan Snyder, and Brad was a direct colleague of mine, friend of mine, and it was we can keep going if you want to pause, but that's kind
Okay,
of the
you know
gist.
what? Yeah, some people are saying the stream's going on. We're not missing anything, everybody. I am monitoring it. There is some sort of a back and forth here of people defending and then attacking Biden and going off on all these different policies that
Okay.
are just not relevant to this
Oh,
discussion.
they're talking about
Important
guns
topic,
off the street
nonetheless.
right now. Okay.
All right. So I just want to make sure that we've got everything set up here. If anybody wants to join the conversation, you knock. Okay, I will see that you knocked. Hang tight. I will let you in. Your video and audio will come up and you'll be able to comment. Okay, that's really, really very cool. So we do want to hear from more people. We want this to be interactive. We've got, over 20 people and more coming in by the minute, which is really cool. So if anybody wants to say, hey, something happened to me or someone I know in the workplace, or I just have a great idea for things we could do to help people who do experience uncomfortable situations or criminal situations or harassing situations, please do come on, because we're going to share this with Congress as they make their legislative solutions. So you can be part of the solution. So let me see if we can bring the sound back here. Are you guys seeing the text at least, so people who are not hearing can read
Yeah,
along?
we
Okay.
can.
All right, here we go.
Risk to ensure that the truth comes out about the NFL and the Washington football team, now known as the Washington Commanders. Sexual harassment is a serious problem. According to a Pew Research study, nearly 60% of women have been sexually harassed, and 40% of women have been harassed at work. Many victims fear reporting harassment. In fact, around 90% of victims never file a formal complaint. Why? Because they fear retaliation. That comes as no surprise, since nearly 75% of those who file complaints do face retaliation. Sexual harassment is a dangerous cycle. Perpetrators harass, victims who report are ignored, silenced, or retaliated against, and then the perpetrators get away with their misconduct and they repeat it again and again and again.
Totally despicable.
We are here today to help break this cycle. That's why the chairwoman and I launched our investigation into sexual harassment at WFT, the Washington football team, and the NFL's mishandling of it. The WFT and the NFL, among the most prominent workplaces in America, should be setting a higher standard for others, not avoiding accountability and not covering up sexual harassment. In fact, the NFL previously embraced this role of adopting higher standards for itself. In 2014, in the wake of the Ray Rice domestic violence scandal, Commissioner Roger Goodell said the NFL is, quote, held to a higher standard, and properly so. But behind the scenes, neither the WFT nor the NFL was holding itself to this higher standard. We'll hear painful stories from our victims about the severe, pervasive sexual harassment they experienced spanning almost 2 decades. We'll hear how the harassment wasn't limited to 1 or 2 harassers or even 1 or 2 victims. It spanned the entire organization. And that rot started at the top with team owner Daniel Snyder, and it trickled down. Mr. Snyder claimed in response to media reports of the harassment that he was, quote, unaware of these allegations and was simply, quote, hands off as an owner, close quote. As we'll hear today, unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth. And Mr. Goodell has engaged in troubling behavior as well. As I said, Goodell claimed in 2014 to embrace a, quote, higher standard for the NFL, but in 2018, he failed to implement recommendations from a sexual harassment investigation of the Carolina Panthers. Those recommendations, if implemented, could have protected today's victims. The NFL had a playbook to fight sexual harassment. It just didn't use it. But Goodell didn't just fail to implement those recommendations. The NFL deep-sixed the findings from its own investigation into the Washington football team. Mr. Goodell and Mr. Snyder worked together to make sure the public never heard the full story until now. Fortunately, the victims before us have been brave enough to speak out. Speaking out shouldn't be their burden. They should not have to retell day after day the stories of their trauma. But unfortunately, that's where we've wound up, thanks to the NFL's apparent cover-up. After we hear from these victims, we'll all be clear on one thing: to ensure real accountability and to stop workplace harassment in the future, the NFL and WFT must release the findings of its own investigation. This is the beginning, not the end, of holding the rich and powerful accountable and protecting women across America from workplace sexual harassment. Recognizing the NFL's power and popularity, Roger Goodell once said that we should hold the NFL to a higher standard. And starting with today's roundtable, we will. I yield back,
Wow.
Chairwoman.
Very, very powerful
Hey,
words.
gentlemen.
Wouldn't you guys say? I mean, Nick, what's your reaction to that? Because that's a direct attack not only on Washington football team, but really the congressional reps here are implicating Roger Goodell in sort of being complacent, is the allegation, and not doing enough to try to prevent all this stuff, having knowledge and not acting.
Well, it is big because the NFL prides themselves on integrity. And you look at a lot of the campaigns that they promote, some with players, some with promoting education. It is something that they always talk about. But in a lot of these situations, in corporate America and NFL, you tie them into it as well. I mean, there's a saying where I come from: don't talk about it, be about it. And, actions speak louder than words. So we've seen a lot of campaigns, I guess, counter to what we're discussing here today. But to me, to implicate Daniel Snyder and Roger Goodell, now it is something like he said, it's top down. And you are relying on these individuals who are in power to set the policies for all 32 teams. And when that doesn't happen, that becomes problematic, because what you're doing essentially is allowing the behavior to continue. And like he said, it's real important. When someone is going through situations like this and you feel as though you have nowhere to turn, and when you say something, now you become the person who is now causing all the chaos when you have been victimized by someone, maybe in an upper management position or even another coworker. But there has to be some policy change that allows for transparency so people can now go forth and come forth and be honest about what has happened and taken place with them.
Yeah, we're going to go back in a second. But Nick, I mean, you played for the NFL. You know sort of the dynamic there. I don't know what you're comfortable talking about, but it's like, imagine, oh, you know what, we'll get back to that. Let's hear from Miss Coburn. She's a former Washington football team cheerleader.
For taking time today to explore the injustices that have taken place within the NFL and the Washington football team. I'm grateful that you recognize the severity of this issue and why it's important to men and women in the workplace. The Washington football team engaged in harassment and abuse openly and without consequence for more than 2 decades. I personally experienced harassment and misogyny during my 14 years with the organization, both as a cheerleader and marketing executive. I eventually left in 2011 because my work environment routinely made me feel anxious and unsafe. The harassment and objectification of the cheerleaders was constant. Under Dan Snyder's leadership, women were used as sex objects and tools to increase sales rather than dignified human beings. At cheerleader auditions one year, Dan Snyder ordered the director of the squad to parade the ladies onto the field while he and his friends gawked from his suite through binoculars. The women were directed to turn around slowly, as if they were cattle being examined for sale. One of the women cried on the sidelines because she didn't understand what was happening. The next year, we had to start an ambassador squad made up of beautiful women who were not cheerleaders, but dressed to look like them. They were paraded through suites, and in later years, the men who paid for those suites were invited to come to our calendar shoots and to judge our auditions. Over the years, it became clear that Dan Snyder and his male executives were far too interested in the cheerleaders. Eventually, Dan himself had the final say of who made the team and who got months in the calendar. Unbelievably, he requested binders of photographs for auditions and the calendar so that he could choose who to cut based on looks, not talent. One year, he cut 10 veterans who otherwise would have made the team based on their skill and experience, evidently because they weren't the prettiest in his opinion. It was known as the Tyson's Massacre. Think about that. An NFL owner who hired and fired employees based solely on their looks. Despicable. During calendar production one year, a male executive took unedited prints off the graphic designer's desk despite my warnings to protect them. One of these compromising full-size photos was one of the team's most loyal employees and my dear friend. She's sitting next to me today. I'm still haunted by this. And at the time, there was no HR department or any reporting mechanism for this abusive behavior. While cheerleaders are rightfully proud of their skill as dancers, their athleticism, and their beauty, executives essentially treated them as a collection of toys. I recall one time the team arranged for the cheerleaders to wash cars in their uniform at an event for a new sponsor. The ads for this event were completely inappropriate and displayed what appeared to be exotic dancers washing cars, not cheerleaders. Bottom line, women were objects. We were disposable and exploited over and over. I felt compelled to come forward publicly when I read the second shocking Post article that revealed 2 lewd videos of the cheerleaders that were secretly created. I was physically ill when I read that piece. The Good Bits videos, produced at the behest of Dan Snyder, were secretly made from footage taken at our calendar shoots. We trusted the production team to capture footage and keep it safe. Little did we know they were zooming in on private parts and keeping cameras rolling during costume changes. I've cried with the women in these videos as they explain the horror of seeing themselves in what is essentially a soft porn video, soundtrack to Dan Snyder's favorite bands. These women remain traumatized. I stayed at the team years longer than I wanted to because I felt compelled to do what I could do to protect the cheerleaders. But it was not just cheerleaders who were exploited and harassed. It was the overwhelming majority of female employees working for the team. The culture and environment in those offices was deplorable, like a frat party run by a billionaire who knew no boundaries. Early in my marketing role, I was invited to an awards trip in Aspen. I was one of 2 women that stayed in Dan Snyder's home. After a drunken dinner at a restaurant that included watching my boss go shot for shot with a female employee and seeing another colleague hazed to drink despite being a recovering addict, I returned to Dan Snyder's house only to be sent to my room in the basement and told to stay there. I later learned from a colleague who was there that it was because the men had invited prostitutes back. I've had many sleepless nights and anxiety-ridden days the past 18 months. Reliving these events has been traumatic, but beyond this pain, there's fear. Dan Snyder rules by fear. We've seen Dan's vindictive wrath for years, such as when he nearly bankrupted the Washington City paper for an unflattering article. He sent private investigators to the homes of a dozen former cheerleaders last year, and I got calls from these terrified women who didn't understand why PIs were showing up on their doorsteps. He offered hush money to a group of us in exchange for our silence last February, but we declined. This was offensive and certainly felt like intimidation and witness tampering to us. The NFL is now complicit in this scandal. Its commissioner, Roger Goodell, asked the investigator to give an oral report, so we can't corroborate the victim's claims, and there's nothing official for the public to react to. 10 months, more than 120 witnesses, and nothing. Roger Goodell's claim that he was trying to protect us is outrageous and cowardly. The public optics of him caring is appalling. Goodell betrayed every woman who suffered harassment and abuse at the Washington football team. Finally, I am a daughter, a sister, a wife. I am called mommy by 2 amazing boys who now know what sexual harassment is. I came forward at great personal risk to try to effect change for the future. There must be transparency so there can be true accountability. I'm here today in hopes that you will demand the NFL release the report. Thank you, and I'm willing to answer any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson, you are now recognized for your statement.
Megan, do you want to give a little quick rundown on who Tiffany Johnston is? And I just want to say that was extremely powerful stuff. We'll discuss it in a little while. I don't want to miss this testimony.
She's about to start. She's about to start, but she's a cheerleader that has direct allegations to Dan Snyder.
Thank you.
During my 8-year tenure as both a cheerleader and a marketing manager. It is never easy for me to tell my story publicly. I basically block these experiences to avoid dealing with the trauma. I'm ready to talk, I'm ready to tell the full story, and I am beyond ready to see accountability. Dan Snyder and the Washington football team need to be held accountable, and the report needs to be released. I'm here today to tell you about the sexual advances by Dan Snyder and the constant unprofessionalism and boys' locker room culture that started at the top with Dan Snyder and continued down the line with all of Dan Snyder's senior team. I began working for the Washington football team in 2002 after a team executive approached me and presented me with an opportunity. He said he was creating a new position with the club level tickets team, a marketing and events coordinator, and he had me in mind from our interactions at team events while I was a cheerleader. He and I went to breakfast to discuss the opportunity, and after lots of conversations with my parents, I was in my early 20s after all, and with my boss at Booz Allen Hamilton, I decided if there ever was a time to leave a distinguished, incredibly professional company like Booz Allen to take a job with an NFL team now in my early 20s was the time. Boy, did I learn a lot at the Washington football team under top executives and Dan Snyder. Let me share some of the highlights I learned during my tenure with the team. I learned what a pearl necklace is while in a marketing meeting with my boss and male coworkers. And it's not the kind you receive from your grandmother at 8th grade graduation. For those of you who didn't know, like my mom, it's an offensive sexual term. I learned from another high-level executive that I should wear low-cut blouses when making sales pitches to potential suite owners. Apparently, it generates faster sales. I also learned from this same executive that the best way to avoid an uncomfortable situation in front of potential suite owners is to just do what my boss asks, which on one occasion involved him tossing me in the air to do a cheerleader stunt for a client while I was wearing a skirt. I learned on one specific occasion that when I was asked by my boss to attend a networking event, and to dress cute, it was actually an orchestration by him and Dan Snyder to put me in a compromising sexual situation. I learned that placing me strategically by the owner at a work dinner after this networking event was not for me to discuss business, but to allow him, Dan Snyder, to place his hand on my thigh under the table. I learned how to discreetly remove a man's unwanted hand from my thigh at a crowded dinner table at a busy restaurant to avoid a scene. I learned that job survival meant I should continue my conversation with another coworker rather than call out Dan Snyder right then in the moment. I also learned later that evening how to awkwardly laugh when Dan Snyder aggressively pushed me towards his limo with his hand on my lower back, encouraging me to ride with him to my car. I learned how to continue to say no, even though a situation was getting more awkward, uncomfortable, and physical. I learned that the only reason Dan Snyder removed his hand from my back and stopped pushing me towards his limo was because his attorney intervened and said, Dan, this is a bad idea. A very bad idea, Dan. I learned that I should remove myself from Dan's grip while his attorney was distracting him. I also learned at that moment during an unspoken conversation between my boss and I that my boss was not there to look out for me. He was there to listen to any directive his boss, Dan Snyder, had given to him at my cost. The next day, I learned when I told a senior coworker about Dan Snyder's sexual advance that I should, quote, not repeat this story to anyone outside this office door. That was when I also learned there was no one to go to about Dan Snyder's advance, no path to report the incident, so I learned to move on. As a Washington Redskins cheerleader, I learned a lot as well. In the last couple of years, I learned that Dan Snyder, via senior vice president, demanded my unedited, enlarged lingerie calendar photo be sent to his office. I learned that this demand was made urgently because they knew that the graphic artist was getting ready to Photoshop my personal areas before the edited proof went before all of the senior VPs and Dan Snyder for approval. This is my story. I also learned by recounting these details and telling the story that I at some point subconsciously developed an emotional wall that I can only assume is a means to protect myself as a result of my tenure at the Washington football team. This has affected me more than I originally thought. This is something no woman should be subjected to in the workplace. No one should have to learn about pearl necklaces or be objectified and harassed. And certainly no one should have to fend off sexual advances from a company's owner. I sit here before you and hope that my words will have a lasting impact as these events have had on me, so we can work to hold all employers accountable for ensuring a safe and professional workplace. Transparency should be the standard so that accountability follows. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Baker, you are now recognized for your statement.
Megan, can you just give me one sentence on Brad Baker?
Brad Baker was my colleague in the production department. He was one of the ones that heard the owner about putting together the Good Bits video in 2008.
Production department. I grew up a diehard Redskins fan. Diehard. On my first day at what I thought was going to be my dream job, I quickly learned that the Washington football team was a place where male executives regularly harassed, demeaned, and bullied women in the workplace, and they got away with it. For decades. For decades, they got away with it. I'm testifying today because the Washington football team must be held accountable for the toxic workplace it created and the harm it caused so many people. We were told on day one to never make eye contact with Dan Snyder, never speak to him. If you must speak about him, he's referred to as Mr. Snyder or the owner. If he's walking towards you, duck into the nearest office. Under no circumstances should you interact with him. Things only got worse from there. In the early summer of 2008, a normal production meeting with the video department was wrapping up when Larry Michael, then executive producer of media and one of Snyder's top lieutenants, asked me and two other male producers to stay behind and shut the door. The female members of the department were dismissed. Larry Michael told us that the owner had a special project for us and needed us to edit together a video of the good bits from our cheerleader calendar video shoot. It wasn't hard to put two and two together. Larry Michael, one of Snyder's top confidants, has tasked us with producing a video for Snyder of sexually suggestive footage of cheerleaders, obviously unbeknownst to any of the women involved. One of the senior producers said he'd take care of it, and later on, while passing through the editing suite, I saw several images on both the editing monitor and the monitor of our tape deck that featured the cheerleaders posing for their photo shoot, but it was like outtakes, and their breasts and pubic areas were exposed. It became crystal clear that my worst suspicions were true. The video department had been told to edit together lewd footage of the cheerleaders at the request of Dan Snyder. So why did I speak up and share this story with the Washington Post? I was inspired by Emily Applegate, my former colleague Megan Imbert, and the stories of so many other women who are now speaking up. I was still working in sports at the time, and it's a notoriously hostile, abusive, and sexually harassing industry in which to work. I felt like if we all spoke up, told the truth, and believed in the process, that we could make a positive impact and inspire some change in workplace culture all over the country, especially in the world of sports. But now here we are, because the National Football League swept the findings of the Wilkinson investigation under the rug. The NFL has refused to release the report of the Wilkinson investigation, even though myself and over 100 other employees were asked by the league to speak to the Wilkinson firm. We all participated because we thought the NFL wanted to know the truth. We believed that the toxic workplace culture and the serious harm it caused would finally become public and that the investigation would end with some kind of report. I mean, they were able to release a report that was 243 pages long. 243 pages long on the PSIs of footballs, the pounds per square inch of footballs. Surely, women being sexually harassed and lewd outtakes videos of female employees created without their consent could muster up some kind of written report, right? Even as employees came forward, Dan Snyder still tried to control them and intimidate them by hiring private investigators to contact the various employees during the Wilkinson investigation. Snyder had private investigators digging around in my past. Do you know what it feels like to have someone dig into your personal life? To worry that a friend or family member is going to be called by a PI? Even with threats of intimidation, I and many other former employees came forward to speak with the NFL investigators because we believed that the NFL would finally take action against Snyder and the Washington football team. And you know what? Turns out the NFL does not care. If they cared, they'd have held up their end of the bargain by meeting the smallest and most basic expectation any of us ever had of them: to be transparent and release a report. All we're asking for is transparency. That's all we've ever wanted. Once the horrors of working at the Washington football team are exposed, accountability will undoubtedly follow. But we can't determine accountability without transparency. And that's why I'm begging you, the United States Congress, and our elected officials to compel the National Football League to do the absolute bare minimum and release the report.
Wow.
Thank you. Ms. Nunez, you're now recognized for your statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney and members of the committee for holding this important roundtable. My name is Ana Nunez, and I worked in sales for the Washington football team for almost 4 years. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for my colleagues, both women and men,
who are here before you, survivors of the abuse and sexual harassment that we endured during our time working for the Washington football team. I am also here as a representative of the dozens more that cannot be here. The NFL did not protect us when they needed to, but they still have a chance to make it right. The NFL preaches about inspiring change, but that only seems to be the case when it's convenient for them. I hope today makes a difference, and I hope with Congress's involvement, we can achieve some accountability for the team and the NFL. I was employed at the Washington football team from March of 2015 to January of 2019. I was 23 when I began working there in the sales department. During my time with the team, I was sexually harassed by multiple male employees, including top executives. Often these male employees had a reputation for mistreating young female employees. Everyone knew about their mistreatment and even saw it happening, but no one did anything. When I became a victim and tried to report it, no one did anything about it. I won't describe every instance of sexual harassment I experienced during my time there because it was almost a part of my everyday experience. But I want to share some examples with you that really stuck with me. In 2017, while I was working at what was formerly known as Redskins Park, I endured sexual harassment by two senior level employees. The first was the senior vice president of communications who came to my desk and commented on my jeans I was wearing in a very inappropriate way. This executive had a reputation for making inappropriate comments about female colleagues' attire and their bodies, just as he did with me, but he was so high up in the organization that we were afraid to say anything. He did this in front of everyone, and no one seemed to care. Around the same time, I was also sexually harassed by the director of pro personnel. I connected with this individual because he was of Latino background, and there were only a handful of non-white employees there. What started as friendly and professional conversations quickly turned into him texting inappropriate messages that made me feel extremely comfortable. In one exchange, he told me I looked nice and mentioned the things he would do to me. I responded back via text and told him to never say things like that to me again. I was afraid to push back like that because he was more senior than me and it shouldn't have been my responsibility. But I knew there was no real HR and no one would have done anything to make him stop. So I had to stand up for myself. This man had a well-known history of sexual harassment with other employees and interns. So I also felt ashamed that I became another victim of his. These were the times that I felt hopeful there would be a change, only to be disappointed. In early summer 2018, with the arrival of new leadership, it felt like a horrible workplace culture could finally be addressed. I was encouraged to speak to the assistant legal counsel for the team about my experience with sexual harassment, which I did. I sat in his office, told him the stories, saw him write in his notebook, and I accepted the tissues he offered me when I became emotionally overwhelmed that someone might finally do something to change the workplace culture. But I was wrong. Nothing came from me telling him what I had gone through. Even worse, the sexual harassment continued. Later that summer at training camp in Richmond, I was with colleagues, including the head trainer. After an after-work gathering, when we got up to leave, he had grabbed my wrist and asked, "What are we going to talk about us?" I think I asked, "What about us?" There is no us. I had never had a conversation with this man before. I felt ashamed and embarrassed because once again, I felt the fear of retaliation and the shame of being sexually harassed. Again, I felt like there was no point in reporting him because no one had been held accountable before. I stand before you here today, reliving these difficult memories to try to make a change for other women at the team, in the league, the industry, and the workplace. There are just some of the stories that the Washington football team and the NFL have tried so hard to hide. I want to shine a light on the toxic workplace that we endured and to plead with the NFL to release the report from the Wilkinson investigation, holding the Washington football accountable here and sending the message that this is the type of harassment and abuse that will not be tolerated, will impact the many women and men who endure similar harassment, not only in sports, but also in workplaces across the country.
Ms. Eagles, thank you, Ms. Eagleson. You are now recognized for your statement.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairwoman Maloney and the committee for holding this important roundtable on an issue that directly impacts myself, those present, and women across the country who hold 50% of American jobs.
I wish that I didn't have to be here sharing personal and intimate details about my life, details that are public knowledge and can be easily searched on the internet. I wish that I didn't have to resort to speaking to the Washington Post for there to be any sort of public investigation into the team. I wish that when I reported my experiences to the team and to the NFL that there would have been change and accountability. But at this point, my options have been exhausted, and that's led me here to reveal truths and details once again about myself and my experience working at the Washington football team. 81% of women have reported experiencing some sort of sexual harassment and or assault in their lifetime. I wish that I didn't become a part of that statistic at my place of employment. I worked at the Washington football team for 8 years, and I can't recall a time that I didn't experience or fear sexual harassment. It was just a pervasive part of the culture and an unavoidable rite of passage being a woman who worked there. Working for the team was my first full-time job out of college, and I was so excited to start working for the team. I grew up in Maryland, and I rooted and cheered for them my entire life. I experienced many work firsts there. First bonus, first promotion, first office potluck, first employee hire, first threat of physical violence by a supervisor, first hostile work environment, first public humiliation, first sexual assault. When I initially reported sexual harassment to my boss, I was terrified. I was only 24, and the man who sexually harassed me was old enough to be my father, and he also was considered the voice of the team in the public sphere. So to me, the power that he held in his position and his close personal relationship with Daniel Snyder was enough for me to reconsider anything. And at the time, I didn't know and realize that 55% of victims experience retaliation after speaking up or making a claim. I still decided to tell my boss about my harasser's public comments about my appearance, his unwanted kisses on the cheek, and the emails about special gifts he expected from me. When I told my boss, we agreed that nothing would happen if I reported it to the person who was supposedly running HR at that point. And so my boss called my harasser on the phone. Mind you, we were in 2 different locations. I was in Maryland and he was in Virginia. So this had to be done via phone call. I was in the room when my boss called him to tell him to leave me alone. And it's a memory I'll never forget because I distinctly remember hearing my harasser yell through the phone, "What the fuck is she thinking?" And I just kind of muted everything after that. So fearing further harassment and retaliation, I took to hiding from him at public events. I strategically would place myself between colleagues so he couldn't get near me. And I just felt humiliated to have to hide in plain sight in front of all of my colleagues, my clients, and I was just so frustrated that I had to avoid company functions for fear that I would experience sexual harassment again. And most of all, it made me feel worthless. All the hard work I put into my work and the team, and I was reduced to my appearance and not my value as an employee. The second time I decided to report harassment was with the arrival of a new executive team similar to Anna that was specifically hired to help change the business. I told them about the public comments about my appearance, the unwanted kisses on the cheek, the email, as well as the time at training camp I was sexually assaulted by the same man that I had previously reported. Those executives were appalled at my treatment and had good intentions to effect change, but they were all fired within 6 months of reporting this. And after they were fired, and this was reportedly because the old guard at the Washington football team did not want change, I just felt like I had zero protection. I didn't want to go back to avoiding people, clients, events, and even my own job to keep away from my harasser. So I resigned from my position without another job lined up so I wouldn't have to deal with this. It's my sincere hope that Congress will hold the Washington football team and the NFL accountable for creating and maintaining a toxic workplace for so long, and that burying the results of the 10-month investigation would reveal exactly what happened and who was responsible. The 20-year reign of sole team owner now, Dan Snyder, an era permeated with bullying, verbal abuse, sexual harassment, and sexual assault, has unfortunately been given the stamp of approval by the NFL. Myself and many other brave individuals have come forward to share our experiences and actively participate in the investigation we believed would be fair and transparent. It wasn't. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell used us and the investigation to make it seem like he cared about this issue, but then he blamed us for not receiving or releasing a report. Let's be very clear. The people that I know that participated in this investigation wanted and expected a report. There must be transparency, and only then can we have real accountability. This is not just about the Washington football team and its employees. It's about the millions of women in workplaces across the country who endure harassment every day in our everyday lives. It's about the message that the NFL sent to American women everywhere when it brushed aside the victims who came forward and embraced Dan Snyder. That message was, we don't care about you and you don't matter. We are now here before all of you in Congress, once again, telling our stories and revealing intimate details about ourselves that we shouldn't have to. I look forward to seeing what you all and what Congress message, the message that you all send to workplaces and women across America. Thank you.
Wow.
Ms. Applegate, you're now recognized for your statement.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Maloney and the rest of the members of the committee for being here today and for taking the steps necessary to create a change that all women can benefit from, the opportunity to work in environments free of harassment. My name is Emily Applegate. I began working for the Washington football team exactly 8 years ago as of tomorrow. While my time with the team was short, my experiences there have altered the structure of my entire life. In July of 2020, the Washington Post published a story that quoted me saying, working for the Washington football team was the most miserable experience of my life. I stand by that statement to this day. To add to it, dealing with the NFL, Roger Goodell, and Dan Snyder has continued to be the most miserable experience. On a daily basis, I was sexually harassed by my direct boss, the chief marketing officer of the team. Every day, I was forced into uncomfortable conversations about my body and about my appearance. I was told to wear tight outfits to events so clients had something to look at. I was asked invasive questions about my dating life, specifically if I was interested in older men because my boss was significantly older than me. I was told I wasn't allowed to wear flat shoes because he liked the way my body looked better when I was in high heels. My photograph was taken without my permission and passed to other executives throughout the team by my boss. I was called Jewish slurs that refer to a non-Jewish woman that you are sexualizing. A slur, which I will not repeat, a rabbi described as simply indefensible, condescending, racist, and misogynistic. When I stood up for myself, I was told that I was a distraction, as if it was my fault that grown men in a professional setting could not control themselves. To address the most common question that I get, why didn't you report to Human Resources? I didn't report to Human Resources because Dan Snyder created a culture where this behavior was accepted and encouraged. I was told not to speak to Dan Snyder. I was told to never even look Dan Snyder in the eye. Many employees were intimidated into not speaking to our boss and intimidated into not reporting the harassment they experienced or they witnessed. Any time suggestions were made to create processes to report the behavior that we're describing today, it seemed to fall on deaf ears, as evidenced by the fact that little to no concrete changes were ever made. If changes were made, the culture of harassment would have never been able to continue. Instead of taking any accountability, Dan Snyder and his wife have claimed to be victims. While at the same time the harassment investigation was happening, they accumulated more wealth from becoming the sole owners of the Washington football team, courtesy of the NFL. Roger Goodell has proven once again he is unequipped to handle important issues within the NFL. He has mishandled social justice issues, domestic violence issues, and now sexual harassment issues. Worst of all, there have been so many good people that have become collateral damage while these two men cover up 2 decades of sexual harassment. Today is when the journey of truly holding these people accountable begins. Today is when Democrats and Republicans can come together and ensure that what we experienced will not happen anywhere else throughout this country. Today is when we can make a difference and we can show the American people how impactful Congress can be. Those that sit here today and many others came forward at great personal risk. We did our part believing that what we were doing would help employees across the country, but to our shock and our disappointment, the NFL did nothing. When the investigation of the air pressure of Tom Brady's football concludes with 200 plus pages of a written report, but 2 decades of sexual harassment concludes with nothing, the NFL is showing us their complete lack of respect for women, for their employees, and for the culture of our country. The same as every day, I'm asking for transparency and accountability. I am once again asking the NFL to release the report and to take appropriate action. I'm so grateful to every woman and man who spoke out about their experiences with the Washington football team. It is extremely difficult to repeatedly share your personal experiences, especially on such a large stage. Thank you all again for taking this issue on. This issue is big enough that if handled properly, will positively affect the people's lives across the country. I'm looking forward to seeing our government work to improve the lives of all Americans by putting an end to sexual harassment and discrimination in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to thank all of the panelists for your courage today. I now recognize myself for 3 minutes. On July 1st, 2021, the NFL issued a press release announcing the outcome of its investigation into the Washington football team, stating, and I quote, "None of the managers or executives identified as having engaged in misconduct is still employed at the club," end quote. Ms. Johnson, your opening statement included startling new allegations against team owner Daniel Snyder. So let me ask you directly, is the NFL statement that wrongdoers have been removed from the Washington football team accurate?
Absolutely not. It all started from the top with Dan Snyder every day on every single issue.
So it hasn't been removed, and how do you know that to be the case?
I witnessed it. I witnessed it in marketing meetings. Any marketing flyer that went out had to be approved by Dan Snyder. We'd be on the phone with him telling us changes, the smallest changes, from the verbiage we used to the player's picture we used. And then it was the culture he created. It was an abusive one. He berated the male employees when they didn't do what he considered a good job. And then it was just the sexual culture he created every day, day in and day out.
Ms. Johnson, I received a letter dated today from Jason Friedman, a former vice president who worked for the Washington football team for over 20 years. And here is the letter. He was apparently with you the night that Dan Snyder personally harassed you. And here's what he said. He has never told his story publicly before, and I want to quote now from his letter. He says, "I witnessed Dan Snyder grab the arm of my coworker, Tiffany Johnston, and attempt to pull her into his limousine. This took place over a dinner in Washington, D.C. I was shocked. Thankfully, Tiffany was able to quickly pull away." Ms. Johnson, I want to thank you for coming forward, for your courage and the courage of the others at this table that has inspired others to come forward. My hope is that they will remain inspired until the full truth comes out, but we have a steep climb. That is because for nearly 2 decades, Mr. Snyder has used non-disclosure agreements to silence employees who have experienced sexual harassment and other workplace abuses. He has made it difficult for employees to come forward due to fear of retaliation. I'd like to ask Ms. Nunez. Ms. Nunez, do you believe that employers should be able to use NDAs to prevent employees from disclosing sexual harassment, discrimination, and other workplace misconduct?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. Congress must act to protect workers from the abusive scope of non-disclosure agreements, not being able to report, and other abuses. I look forward to working on legislative reforms with my colleagues to address this troubling practice. I now recognize Mrs. Fox, Representative Fox.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, today this committee is holding a roundtable to examine the Washington football team's toxic workplace culture. I'm truly saddened to hear these stories, and I agree with the participants who noted in their heart-wrenching statements that this type of behavior has no place in any workplace and is disgusting. The proper venue to explore these types of claims is in the courtroom, not before this committee. To my knowledge, there's no pending litigation regarding the events we've heard discussed today, nor does this committee have legislative jurisdiction over this issue. It concerns me that this committee is choosing to spend its limited time having this discussion on the NFL and second-guessing decisions when there are multiple Biden-caused catastrophes that desperately need our attention and oversight.
Okay. I don't think that's very valuable after the really powerful testimony that we heard from people. Clearly, I mean, that's ridiculous. Clearly, this is a very, very important issue that affects tens of millions of Americans. And as one of the women that testified said, 50% of the American workforce nearly is women. But I think, Nick, I mean, I'd love to hear what you thought from all that stuff, because there are so many takeaways, there's so much to unpack. And I want to hear from people on the live stream too. If you want to comment, just knock and we'll bring you into the conversation. But I mean, this isn't just an issue for women in the workplace, even though that's a lot of the people that are targeted in this circumstance. But for men and also people of different races and people of different religions and sexual orientations, this is a American issue.
Well, it is a much larger issue. I don't know the name of the woman who was just speaking, talking about the committee wasting their time talking about this particular issue, but this is a much larger issue that kind of, if it was a tree, just kind of has branches that seep into other parts of our culture. So this is part of the idea that needs to change. The idea that, hey, this is a smaller topic. We don't need to spend our time on it because there's other pressing things. But this is so important. As I listen to all the women give their compelling accounts of what took place with them and other cheerleaders in the environment and workplace culture, as a father, as a man, as a brother, I was really upset, and I really had to contain myself emotionally, because you want to show, I guess, a sense of anger, or you want to cry at some of the things that you heard, because you're thinking that no one should be subjected to enduring this type of environment, and it shouldn't be a continuation of it. The idea of saying, okay, well, hey, I've worked here for 8 years, I've been around here for 20 years, and it just seems as though the environment has not changed. That's a lot of time for anyone to have gone through what they've gone through. And I think for me, when we hear a lot of these situations, we hear a lot of women come out and talk about sexual harassment in the workplace and a toxic environment. But one thing we never really hear from, we never hear a male side of it. So having a man sit down and testify as to what these women went through, and he's seen it, he's heard it, and he knows what's going on, to me, that's testimony that definitely needs to be heard. And everyone needs to know that, you know what, this may be happening to a woman, but just because you're a man and you see it, you don't have to continue the frat boy type of culture. You can say something. So I hope it's an eye-opening thing for everyone to know that, see something, say something, because just because you're saying it's not happening to me or affecting me directly, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't jump in and stand up for a woman or another male co-worker to say that this is wrong. This behavior, this culture needs to stop. But once again, it is that retaliation that most people are afraid of. But this is why I applaud, Megan and so many women who are coming out about this issue, because right now they're paying the ultimate sacrifice. They are falling on the proverbial sword to make sure that awareness comes up about this particular issue, to make sure, not just for them, but everyone else, and even my daughter doesn't have to go through this moving forward at some point in her life when she starts working for whomever she works for.
Nick, one thing I want to touch on really quickly that I think is really important for the group of what just happened and what you mentioned about the male role in this. If you witness something, saying something, one thing that is incredibly critical that just happened that we all witnessed was that letter that was read from Jason Friedman. He, for the first time, has come forward in that setting to share what he knew because he was able now to corroborate what Tiffany was saying. And that was something, we've through this process behind the scenes, we know what we know what we've experienced, but it also takes corroboration. It takes people that are willing to also stand with us and not and try to have empathy, try to understand like those situations have provided impact or proved to be impactful to all of us. There's people that are on chat that are former employees. Brittany's on there as well. I mean, we've talked about this. We haven't worked at that team in a decade. We're still dealing with the things that we dealt with when we were there. And so many men have been able to move on to different places or thrive. And it was just a blip on the radar of a bad work environment. But a lot of these ladies are still dealing with the situations, whether it be assault or bullying, intimidation. There are women that no longer work in offices because of their experience at the Washington football team.
I just want to share right now. Thank you both. I want to share the representative here as he continues.
He was involved in everything, every minor detail, every major detail of every single day at the office.
And he was,
referencing
of course, involved
Dan
in the
Snyder.
sexual harassment of you.
Absolutely.
Ma'am, Snyder claimed he had, quote, admittedly been too hands-off as an owner, close quote. Unfortunately, as with Ms. Johnston, the opposite was true. Mr. Snyder was all too hands-on, not hands-off. I now recognize the gentleman.
Would my friend yield since he has a little bit more time? Just
knowing in the metropolitan.
Would my friend yield since he has a little bit more time? Just real quick.
Sure, go ahead.
No one in the metropolitan area would believe anything other than the fact that Mr. Snyder is a control freak. And Ms. Johnson is absolutely right. He's involved in every aspect
if you can't see the video.
of this
He's
team
also
and
wearing
its
a Release the
operations.
Report
Thank
shirt
you.
today.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly.
Now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, for 3 minutes. Thank you, Chairman Chris Morphy.
I'm sorry, guys. We just want to fix. I just want to fix something real quick. All right, let's see if that works.
Apply for each one of you by multiples
I had heard
of
about
5,
Dan
10,
Snyder
20
for a
people
long
that have
time.
experienced the same thing.
I quit going.
I had heard about Dan Snyder for a
against
long
our
time.
team.
I quit going. I took
Carolina Panthers, South
my
Carolina,
actions
they
against our
stopped
team
standing for the flag
when the Carolina
owner
Panthers,
got
South
all these
Carolina,
charges.
when they
You know what I did?
stopped
I
standing
didn't
for the
go. I stopped.
flag, when the owner got had all these
that's the
charges.
actions
You
I
know what I
took.
did? I just didn't go. I
Ms.
stopped.
Johnson, the letter that
So
Ms. Maloney read you,
that's the actions
we
I
have sent
took.
her many letters,
Ms. Johnson, the letter that Ms.
to
Maloney read
have
you,
hearings,
we have sent
just
her
like
many
we're having
letters
here, but we would come to a meeting
have
every,
hearings,
every
just
week,
like we're
multiple
having
times.
here. But
If they
we
would
would
have
come to a
hearings
meeting
on the border
every
crisis, I wish I could
every
take
week,
y'all to the
multiple
rape
times.
trees,
If
where
they would
the-
have hearings
the husband
on the
had
border
watched the wife
crisis,
get
I wish
raped
I could
because
take y'all to the rape
drug
trees,
dealer.
Oh my God.
where the
crickets.
All right. You know what? Let me just we're having some issue here. Let me just make sure I can get us back to this video without an echo on it.
Loved ones.
There we go.
The police that are being killed every day. The president's there after the fact. He didn't have the courage to go to the funeral. I wish we could, could have hearings on why the $80 billion in aid was left to Afghanistan, which countries that don't particularly like us. I wish we could have hearings on the January 6th, the people that died there, and have people who were directly responsible for the security here. Namely the Sergeant of Arms, namely Nancy Pelosi. Let's get her up here and have a hearing. But no, we don't do that. And like Ms. Fox says, you know what's going to come of this hearing? Nothing. I wish I could say something differently, but we're having it.
All right, you know what? I think that's ridiculous. I think this is an opportunity, especially with what we're doing. Yeah, okay, maybe stuff that goes on at Capitol Hill isn't always so productive. And I think that's because you don't get the public involved in it. The public doesn't feel like they have a stake in things, like they can be part of the solution. So already Representative Maloney said they're going to be crafting legislation to try to stop non-disclosure agreements in the workplace. That's a first step. I'd love to hear from other people, what they think. Melanie's talking. Let me just bring her in here.
Employees. He needs to be held accountable for his actions.
Agree 100%. Real quickly, Ms. Johnson.
Once the report is released, there will be accountability because of the includings in there are so despicable. And for him to receive a $10 million fine, that's pocket change to him, and even worse, to put his wife in charge, having the report become transparent and released it won't give people a choice, but there has to be some repercussions.
But accountability from Congress to do what? That's what I'm asking.
To get involved, to not allow this to happen, starting with the Washington football team throughout the entire country, at the workplace, for every female that has experienced this, that we can hopefully prevent for tomorrow.
Chairman Christopher, can they answer the question? Ms.
They can
Baker.
finish the question.
I don't think anybody's discrediting or discounting any of the other issues you're bringing up. I just don't understand why this isn't an important issue.
You're here. It is an important issue. I'm saying.
Right, but I feel like you're.
You know what, guys? I'm just pausing it for a second because this is just
Brad's gonna be good.
It's the stereotypical political stuff, Nick. I mean, where now you've just got like people who want to promote other issues that are totally irrelevant to the topic at hand and talk about Biden and all these other things like that. Those are discussions for another day. This is clearly an extremely important thing. And the reason is, a lot of the stories that we cover with the NFL or in sports, they are a means for the public to address things that are going on in everyday people's lives. That's the broader significance of why does this issue with the Washington football team matter? Why should it matter to me? Because we can use that publicity platform to get solutions in place that can help everybody.
Well, that's the part, Amy, of having somewhat of a broader perspective, not just seeing this as just this is Congress and this is a sports issue. So why are you bringing it to us and what should we do about it? You have to expand your scope and say, okay, well, this is a much bigger issue that is dealing with sports for now. But when we look at corporate America and the culture, there's so many companies that are dealing with this internally, but the employees who have become victims, they have been silenced. They don't have a voice. So having Congress get involved to make sure that there is some legislations or there's some new policies, now those individuals who didn't feel as though they had a voice before, now they feel as though I have someone speaking on my behalf.
There's laws that govern workplace safety, as well as non-disclosure agreement laws and so forth. On top of that, we've had 2 briefings regarding Afghanistan. Of course, we have the January 6th committee, and we've had oversight with regard to January 6th. And finally, we've had multiple hearings with regard to defense contractor, waste, fraud, and abuse, federal cybersecurity, FEMA, FBI, and so forth. We can walk and chew gum in this committee. We can do all of the above.
Would the chairman yield?
Let me go to Congresswoman Norton, and then maybe I'll come to you after that. Congresswoman Norton, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, in response to what appears to be an orchestrated response from the other side, that this matter is not as important compared with other issues that this committee could be looking at, I want to indicate that sexual harassment has become such a widespread national issue that I have introduced a bill for a national commission on sexual harassment. In 1918, when the Washington football team mistreatment of its cheerleaders first became front page news, Mr. Snyder brought in a new team of executives led by Brian Lafema. Miss Engelson did the arrival of Mr. Femina and his team give you any hope that things might change at the Washington Football League?
Yes, they started and implemented new policies. They were committed to hiring a practiced HR professional to be at the team, and they brought in third-party resources to teach all employees about sexual harassment and assault, with the notion that that was their first time there and they would be coming back. So yes, I had every confidence that they would be changing the culture.
Well, then what happened to Mr. LaFemina and his team? Were they successful in implementing these changes?
No, because they were all fired before many of these instances could come to fruition. So no, they were not successful because they were just at the precipice of instituting change.
Did things get better for you after Mr. LaFemina was forced to leave the team?
No, the only person who was protecting me was the team's lawyer, and he was the only person who had my back. I still had to have meetings with the same person who sexually harassed and assaulted me. There was no follow-up from HR whatsoever. So no, I didn't have anyone at the team, and that's why I left.
When Commissioner Goodell announced the conclusion of Ms. Wilkinson's investigation, Mr. Snyder said he was, and here I'm quoting him, making a new commitment to ensuring that every employee of the Washington football team comes to a professional and respectful workplace every day. Ms. Eagleson, based on your experience with the Washington football team, do you believe this commitment is sincere?
No, because he made the same commitment in 2018, and there were policies that were recommended by the investigation into the Carolina Panthers that clearly didn't go into effect and trickle down to the Washington football team. So no, I don't think he's being sincere.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Carroll, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I ask for unanimous consent of this committee to enter this article into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chair, nobody is more disgusted by the claims of sexual harassment than I am. But after reviewing all the information, I'm struck about how these witnesses left the team happy about their time there, yet 10 years later, you have them on a panel to say how poisonous the atmosphere was. I'm even more troubled that some of the women who talk about the experience they endured offered to help bring new women into the organization as cheerleaders after they themselves had left. In fact, one of the witnesses on the panel even said back then, "I will always be a Redskin. I am leaving with a smile on my face as I have many wonderful experiences and relationships to take with me." I don't discount that it was an awful environment at the time. There was zero excuse for the way some of these people behaved, but it seems strange to me that after the team's management fired the bad actors, paid millions in fines and settlement, has changed the culture, and now here we are investigating something, the acts that happened 10 years ago. Mr. Chair, this hearing is a farce, and we should be looking at inflation, the economy, Afghanistan, the border crisis, and so many other issues that are important to our nation and to our constituents. Instead, we are spending time looking at a single business, investigating it for things that happened a decade ago. And let me restate again, the owners.
Sorry, there's like a clueless person. It's a waste of space, a waste of time. What's really promising, I think, Nick and Megan, if you want to weigh in, the DC Congresswoman, Eleanor Norton, said that she is going to try to introduce a bill for a national commission on sexual harassment. So now we've got a couple of things. We've got the bill to try to prevent non-disclosure agreements in the workplace, a commission to examine this. But I'm sorry, let's see. Is Mr. Baker coming back on? Let's hear from Brad Baker.
I'm posted December.
Oh, no, go ahead, Megan. It's still that woman talking about.
No, I was just going to say, we prepared for these types of rebuttals, and also we think that they're going to do some type of audit of, what the league has done or what the team has done. But at the end of the day, keeping in mind all of the interference of Dan Snyder, even over the past 8 months, 10 months, just shows that things haven't changed either. So we're prepared for them to say all of this stuff, but fundamentally everyone has a job for the most part in America, other than, I guess, the billionaires that don't need them. But
Nick?
You know what? I got a question for you two guys because obviously I'm a male, so things that I encounter is entirely different from the things that you guys may encounter, maybe even when you were in your adolescent years. But to hear another female just kind of discount what some of these women have passionately said today as, well, that's really nothing. We have all these other things to worry about. How does that make you guys feel to
So,
know that she should be more sympathetic to what these issues are?
so Nick, when she used the word farce, it must have been how recently Brian felt when he heard the word meritless claims, right? That's us being gaslit. That's an example of us being shown like we don't matter. Sure, this happened years ago, but also if you've been in an abusive relationship, if you've been through things, there's good times, there's bad times. We also are reliving and recounting experiences. A lot of us, even people I'm texting that I used to work with, they're like, wow, I remember so much more hearing these stories, or how similar and scary it is that we work there at different times experiencing the same thing. So it hurts. It really does. It's something where it really is being gaslit, and it's almost it's just that's part of toxicity. It's telling you, okay, that happened 10 years ago, but it doesn't matter now.
You know what? I see the dimwits with the same lens. Like it's a female dimwit, it's a male dimwit, it's a dimwit's a dimwit. So those are people that distract from progress, right? So I think just ignoring them, staying focused on the issues and the solutions here. And I am concerned about, these hearings taking place and then nothing really happening later on. So that's why I feel like it's important for this type of coverage. We get by the way, if anybody's listening, you want to join, you can literally come on with your video, just knock on the door. But also in the comments, there's some great comments. And I'm curious, what other types of solutions Megan or Nick or anybody in the chat could say, because like I said, we're going to share this with the congressional reps. So as they try to create legislation and actual law, what do you think could help in these situations? You know what? I'm sorry. Just hold that thought for 1 sec, because this guy's really good. Let's hear Mr. Conley.
For pandering. If you want to give me more time, keep on going, Mr. Comer.
Okay,
Thank you.
Mr. Connolly, you're
This is a
recognized.
sordid tale about power, greed, and money. And we saw the name change yesterday. But until this pervasive culture of abuse and impunity ends, it's nothing more than lipstick on a pig. Mrs. Coburn, in your testimony, you described something very troubling, and I don't think it come out before, and that was an incident that occurred at Mr. Snyder's house, apparently in Aspen, Colorado. This troubled you. Could you expand on what happened and why you saw this as part of a pattern of abuse?
It was a boys' club. It was a fraternity party. There was excessive drinking all the time. There was hazing. I watched my boss, who was not that type of person, who I respected very much, doing shots is not something that he would do. I watched a recovering addict, who was throwing up and missed the rest of the evening because he was so out of character. And yeah, there was, according to the male colleague I was with, there was prostitutes upstairs with the male executives at the home that I was staying in. Of course, there was only one other woman and I, both very young and single, that were invited to even stay in the home.
And would you say that was a unique experience, or
a very unique experience? I tell people often I'm very lucky that I was with the cheerleaders. We were at FedEx Field, away from Redskins Park. I avoided a lot of the personal sexual assault, harassment type situations. I had plenty of harassment from the male executives at various events, calendar shoots, and other things. But yeah.
You were with the team before Mr. Snyder came on board, is that correct?
Yes, I made the team in 1995.
And how would you characterize the change that occurred with the arrival of Mr. Snyder before and after?
Well, it went
from a cultural point of view.
Yeah, as a fan and as a cheerleader, it went from a family affair where everybody loved everybody. The ownership loved the cheerleader director. It was a very family-oriented place, to a business-forward sales mentality, sex sells, and that was it. It totally changed from, a family winning football to how much money can we suck out of this franchise?
With a culture that demeaned
women. Belittled, yes.
as a
objectify
tool
women.
of raising money.
Yes.
I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The story that's being told today is very disturbing. I have no question that what these witnesses have said is factual, not only factually correct, but very, very despicable by the people who have perpetrated that. I would say to you that what we're doing here today, however, probably needs to be in a court of law. And that I am not a lawyer, do not understand what the law is necessarily related to this, but that I would say that no one would be above the law, even if you're in the NFL. And I don't know if anybody had ever approached law enforcement about sexual abuses or the district attorney that may be in the area. So I would ask any of you, was any of this ever reported to law enforcement?
Are you asking if we went to the police station to say that we were being sexually harassed by our bosses?
No, ma'am, I think I had heard sexual assaults also. I do understand the workplace misconduct. That is very inappropriate. And I do understand that evidently HR was not involved. I'm talking about there were things that were violations of the law where someone would have gone to a lawyer to seek legal help and or reporting that to the police.
I don't mind answering that since I was asked something similar about DC. I was
Thank
very young and very naive. And if I could do it all over again, I would have done something with the police. But at 24 years old and it being what you hope to be an exciting, prestigious job, it was not something that you considered when you didn't even have the first step of an HR department to go to. So to even consider taking it to the next level of the police, it just unfortunately and regrettably didn't occur to us.
Yes, ma'am. I think I'm also in reference to a lawyer, whether someone sought legal advice over a circumstance that several people felt like they were in. And I'm not trying to say you did or did not do the correct or right thing. I'm simply asking a question. Did anyone ever seek then a lawyer?
I want to say that's happening right now, but we could only go up against a billionaire with the Women's Law Center.
Did anyone ever think about getting legal counsel?
I would love to answer that question. My desk was situated right outside of the Chief Marketing Officer's office, Mitch Gershman, right outside Bruce Allen's office, and right outside the Attorney General for the team at that time, Eric Schaefer's office. Eric Schaefer, obviously representing the Washington football team, that is his client, had a conversation with me about finding an attorney because what was going on in that building was against the law. To Tiffany's point, as a young 20-something-year-old, you really do not know what to do. When you are going to the Human Resources Department and you're getting nothing, do you really honestly believe that you're going to go to the police and get something about a workplace harassment issue? No, you do not. Do I think that looking back on it, I wish that I went forward with an attorney? Yes, absolutely. But when you're being threatened with your job and you need to worry about paying rent, paying for groceries, putting gas in your car, it's not necessarily something that you go do. We tried to correct the situation in that building. It was obviously fell on deaf ears, as I mentioned earlier. So nobody sought legal advice because we did not have the knowledge that we have now that that was a possibility. And to my point before, how important this hearing is for us to be able to help other people so other people know that there's a possibility that you could get an attorney involved. You could get the police involved.
Thank you, Mr. Sessions. Let me.
Chairman, I'd just like to make an additional comment.
Sorry, sir.
It is my hope that, as this gentlewoman has said, that one of the things that needs to come out of this is, if not the availability of the police, at least that if they do not help you in an HR circumstance, that there are circumstances that people should go to. And I want to thank the gentlewoman for addressing that. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Sessions. That is a helpful comment. Now I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Brown, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Maloney and Chair Chris Lamorty for having this roundtable, and I thank the witnesses for their participation and courage. The NFL has one of the most prominent platforms in the world. Yesterday, America watched the Washington football team's new name unveiling on the Today Show, and in just 10 days, 100 million people are going to tune into the Super Bowl. How the NFL handles the issue of sexual harassment matters. It can shift public discourse for good or bad. In 2014, Commissioner Roger Goodell said, and I quote, "The NFL is held to a higher standard and properly so, given the league's prominent role in American society." So my question is for Ms. Nunes. Ms. Nunes, what message do you think the NFL has sent, given the way it has handled the investigation of the Washington football team?
That unless you have money, unless you have power, honestly, unless you're white, you're powerless. You don't matter. So I think the message they still have the potential to obviously change what is happening, because we're still in it. Obviously, we're still here and pushing. So they definitely have the potential to really do something that truly means to inspire change.
Thank you. So given that the NFL has been pushing a narrative of empowering women that seems convenient to them, does it frustrate you in the light of the NFL public relations campaign involving women's issues?
100%. I think that, it feels like a slap in the face, specifically for women who have gone through this, and then they're seeing that they're inspiring change, they're putting women in positions of power, yet we're over here saying that's not how it is. And I mean, that's essentially what it seems like, is that this is just a facade that they're putting on the outside. However, on the back end, things are still happening. And that's part of why we want the accountability, because take this as setting the example, where if you actually hold Dan Snyder accountable for this, you're setting an example not only for other football teams, but other soccer teams, other leagues, that this kind of behavior is not acceptable.
Thank you. And Ms. Applegate, how can the NFL send the right message about sexual harassment in the workplace?
I believe the first step is to have Roger Goodell also be held accountable. And I believe that in holding Roger Goodell accountable, that means that he should be resigning from his position. As I mentioned in my opening statement, he has proved over and over again that he is unequipped to handle any type of issue within the NFL, social justice, sexual assaults, domestic violence, and now sexual harassment. Beginning with new leadership from the top of the NFL will create change throughout all 32 teams.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. I apologize, Mr. Baker. I forgot to give you a chance to respond. I think there may have been an outstanding question or allegation against you with regard to tweets. Would you like to respond?
I don't recall every single thing that I've tweeted. I will say the dates of some of what she mentioned were many, many years ago. But say more importantly, nothing that I've done outside of the Washington football team has anything to do with why we're here today. And my story is true. We know that the videos that I saw and we were directed to produce, we know they exist and they were created. And that's what I'm here for, is to tell that story.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baker. I'd like to now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Keller, for 3 minutes.
Thank you. And I just would like to thank the witnesses for their courage, who have taken the time to share their experiences with us today. First and foremost, let's start off by saying that there is absolutely no excuse for abusive behavior or harassment in any work environment. And any such instances of such behavior should be fully investigated, and the violators should be held accountable. I'm very sorry that the witnesses with us today have had these types of experiences. This committee has been tasked with investigating waste, fraud, and abuse of taxpayer dollars and ensuring government agencies are operating properly. And to be clear, there are plenty of federal issues within the committee's jurisdiction that deserve our attention also. Inflation is at a 40-year high. Energy prices are skyrocketing, and Americans are struggling to heat their homes and pay their electric bills. Veterans are unable to access essential VA benefits due to certain federal agency closures. Even as the number of encounters DHS officials have had with illegal border crossings, the top 2 million since January 2021. This committee refuses to hold an immigration hearing despite multiple calls from Republicans to do so.
All right, guys. I hate when people just hijack an important discussion, talk about totally irrelevant things, but really, really significant. Nick, curious to hear what you think of this. Emily Applegate calling for the resignation of Roger Goodell as a solution. Do you think that would be appropriate given, how this has been handled?
Well, you know what? The way that I respond to that is by having him relieved of his duty doesn't really change the problem with the culture. Maybe, maybe not. For me, the first thing that I would suggest, because they were asking the women, okay, but what would you think that should be a swift response? To me, is to openly acknowledge that this situation actually took place. And I'll take you back a couple of years dealing with the NFL situation that started with Colin Kaepernick. I mean, 6 years ago, no one really wanted to acknowledge the reason why he was taking a knee. Fast forward, 6 years, now it's like, hey, we're sorry, we stand by our players. So you didn't acknowledge it then, but now you're acknowledging 6 years later. So with this particular situation, it first starts with acknowledging that something actually exists, because when you do that, now that means that you have to put your best foot forward to come up with somewhat of a solution. We always think about the changing of management, that may change things. It may and may not. But the idea is that we may change the face, but did we change the culture? That is what we're talking about. We have to change the culture, and they have to be able to tap into, this is just not an issue that's regulated to sports. This is an issue that's regulated to so many different people, but to hear the posturing that comes up about all the issues that we're dealing with in America, all those things are true. But think about all these individuals who've been silenced, and they too have been suppressed, and they too have been out of work. So when you talk about putting Americans back to work, that's including all these individuals who are involved in this situation with the Washington football team.
A race problem that it refuses to seriously address. Colin Kaepernick, John Gruden, now Brian Flores. The names change, but the problem remains. There is an egregious lack of representation and opportunity for Black leaders in the NFL. But my hometown, Miami Dolphins, are now the catalyst to this conversation over the lack of diversity among football's coaching and executive ranks, and hopefully this will result in reform. This is a common thread, though, and I have a question, Ms. Coburn, of you. And let me just underscore how this represents the expenditure of taxpayer dollars over which we are supposed to jealously guard in this committee. You might be aware that part of the reason that the NFL is such a profitable business is that Congress approved legislation in 1961 that allowed an antitrust exemption where professional football teams to pool together when negotiating radio and television contracts. They also receive lucrative federal tax exemptions and taxpayer dollars in the hundreds of millions to build football stadiums that make them billions. Do you believe Congress should be in the business of protecting an organization that puts the interests of billionaire owners above hundreds of women who experienced harassment and abuse? And do you think that those benefits, that we should consider revoking them if they do not make changes to ensure that you have protections when it comes to human resources, sexual assault, accountability, making sure that there is an equitable and safe workplace for their employees?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. And the NFL recently had a $110 billion media deal, from what I understand. So that amount of money came directly from the exemptions that are in place, thanks to you. I think that the oversight of the NFL needs to stand within you because there's no one else doing it. The money and power is what rules the NFL. And unless somebody steps in and holds them accountable, nothing will change. They will continue business as usual.
I trust that in the future, Mr. Chairman, we will have far more than 3 minutes apiece, and far more time will be devoted by this committee on the leadership of Chairwoman Maloney to ensure that we hold the NFL accountable and that we help you seek justice. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I'd now like to recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm with Ms. Wasserman Schultz. I wish we each had more than 3 minutes to discuss these important issues. I'm grateful to all the witnesses for coming. It's awfully difficult to sit here and listen to the horrific circumstances to which you were subjected. And I want you each to know that I have read each one of your statements. I've also went and read multiple articles about the situation in preparation for this hearing. And I want you to know that I'm really greatly moved by your testimony, and this view of what we've heard today is abhorrent and disgusting. And I would also suggest, Mr. Chairman, I know our chairwoman's not here, but this is really an unusual investigation that we're engaged in. I would encourage, Mr. Chairman, that maybe we look at other examples of this workplace environment that is toxic in this way. And I would suggest we bring in Mr. Zucker from CNN, maybe Chris Cuomo, maybe the producers that have problems. I think we need to expand this. And every one of these victim witnesses who testified today, and in their written report, their statements, all of them said that one thing that is important here is to spread this out to try to end this in multiple venues. And I think that's right. And I would just, before I get to my questions, 3 minutes doesn't give you much time. There are four things that are available to a victim right now, and that's administrative procedures, civil procedures, if there's a criminal conduct, and some of these that I read about looked to me like they involved criminal conduct. So there's criminal procedure, and then there is what I would say is happening today, and that's public pressure and public awareness. And so I thank each of the witnesses for being here. Ms. Colburn, it is my understanding that the Washington football team has new priorities to protect the cheerleading team. Some of these measures include better access to human resources, assignment of an HR employee to the cheerleading team, and now it's called the dance team. Is that enough to protect cheerleaders from a toxic workplace culture?
Not when leadership has not changed. And one of the men who is very closely involved with the cheerleaders, their auditions, their calendar pictures, the videos that were created at the behest of that person, no, I don't believe they're safe.
Thank you. I think you're probably right. I wish we had more time. My time has expired. I hope next time, Mr. Chairman, if we're going to engage in this, that we get back to a 5-minute rule at least. And
sure.
That I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Biggs. I would just point out everyone seems to have been fired except the owner in this particular situation. Now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for coming forward today. Your courage and your resiliency have demonstrated so much to so many. Experiencing workplace harassment as young professional women in a male-dominated profession, and to see it go largely unchecked is dispiriting, but coming forward and publicly sharing your stories is cathartic. And I'm confident that your bravery will help countless women and men down the road and usher in an era of greater equality. Ms. Coburn, in your op-ed, you mentioned that after the secret Good Bits videos hit the news, that you and 40 or so other cheerleader alumni came together and some of you were able to mediate a settlement. Were those who settled, were they barred from going to court because of a forced arbitration agreement? Do you know?
Yes, when those videos were uncovered, that's when I came out publicly. I had the strength and courage to organize them. And yes, they got together, and there was mediation, and there was a settlement. And along with that settlement, they were forced to sign NDAs. To be honest, many of them wish they hadn't. They wish they could have spoken out. They were very vocal before the process began. But they also wanted to squash these videos. Their mothers, their daughters, their businesswomen, and they just wanted those videos to go away. So they settled and signed NDAs. But I'd like to remind you, and that's why I'm here, that those videos were created at the behest of the owner, and that is a criminal offense.
Whatever has happened to those videos, have they been destroyed? Has there been any talk about disposition of those videos?
I'm not sure. I've been told by people involved that they were told to destroy it. I think the Post had copies, but I'm not quite sure where they are. I have a feeling there's many copies in possession of many of Dan Snyder's friends, if I had to guess. With other.
So tell me this, Ms. Coburn, the fact that the NFL under Roger Goodell is covering up the report that was issued pursuant to the investigation, how does this help to perpetuate the good old boy network that engages in sexual discrimination, in sexual harassment, in racial discrimination, racial harassment? How does that impact where we are today with the NFL?
It sends quite a clear message that money and power can buy anything, and that they can get away with anything, and they did.
Well, I thank you for your courage in coming forward, organizing these women, and I hope that you continue to stick with it. We will stick with you, and we will do what Congress can to make sure that we root out this kind of misconduct and not let it continue to perpetuate. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Now I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, courageous women, for coming forward. I want to apologize for some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who were first saying thank you for your courage and then victim blaming you. Like somehow you should go to the human resources department that didn't even exist. When you did go to someone superior to you to complain, you were told to shut up and never repeat it. So let's be
loving this woman.
There was also this question, what can Congress do about this? Well, Congress can do a lot about this. Next week, all of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who aren't here now could vote for the bill by Barry Luthos, that is going to require that no NDAs can be forced upon employees for sexual harassment or sexual assault. That would go a long way. We could also investigate the tax-exempt status of the National Football League. We gave them that tax-exempt status. Evidently, there was $8 billion received last year that was then divided up among the various teams to the tune of about $250 million a team. Oh, how clever is that? How about if the taxpayers had received that money? Because the NFL isn't doing its job. Roger Goodell has to relieve the report. There are 120 victims that came forward and testified. The Beth Wilkinson report must be released. And we need to take a real good look at the NFL and determine whether or not it's really eligible for tax-exempt status. Now, let me ask each of you this question. How many times were you sexually harassed when you were working at the Washington Redskins whatever they're called now, Commanders, I guess?
Are you asking?
I'm going to start with you, Ms. Coburn.
Too many to count. I was there 14 years and it's too many to
Is
count.
it more than 100?
It's more than 100.
More than 200?
How many times per day is the better question? I don't know.
Sexual objectification comments, these uncomfortable situations. I was arm candy at events with all the male executives. Like, it was a very constant thing.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
At least 50 to 100. And it wasn't even just the comments, it was the situations of being tossed in the air with a skirt on and me having to convince myself, keep your legs closed to avoid an uncomfortable situation in front of the potential client.
All right, Ms. Flores?
Over 100.
Ms. Applegate?
I worked there for a year and a half. So mathematically, that would be roughly 515 times because it happened on a daily basis. And that was a 7-day-a-week job.
All right, Singleton.
I echo what Emily said. It happened every single day that you were on site. It didn't matter where you were. It was a pervasive culture that happened. And I worked there for 8 years. So multiply that 500 times by 8.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you. This was a predatory environment. I don't believe it's just going on at the Washington Commanders. This is a message to send to every football team in this country. And the criminal conduct that appears to have gone on at the Washington Commanders needs to be fully investigated. That video must be found and it must be reviewed, and criminal action should be considered by the local district attorney or U.S. attorney. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Donalds, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the witnesses, I was actually in my office listening to your testimony very intently. What you had to deal with and what you were pressured into doing, what you were coerced into experiencing is abhorrent behavior. It's never tolerated anywhere. It should not be tolerated any workplace in the United States. And I think that this body, with respect to sexual harassment, has done a lot of work over the years to make it expressly clear to employers that sexual harassment, sexual misconduct is not to be tolerated in the United States. I think that the report in question by the NFL should be released. I'm a fan of the product, but it is clear that there are several issues with the NFL, this being one of them. And I think that that report should be released. I think the other thing that it is important, and you've heard it, obviously from my side of the aisle, is it Congress's purview to quote unquote do something? I don't want to use hyperbole in this instance because what we're discussing is incredibly serious and incredibly sensitive. But Congress also has to be very careful about its role, not just with the Washington Redskins. I still call them the Redskins. I know they changed their name, but to me, it's always going to be the Redskins. It's not whether it's with the Washington Redskins or with any corporation in particular. We have a responsibility here of regulating specifically the United States economy when it comes to interstate commerce, to regulating our borders, to actually making sure we coin sound money, that we appropriate for the necessary functions of government. But one of the things that the Constitution of these United States actually precludes us from doing is interfering directly in the affairs of individual businesses, no matter how abhorrent they may be. Now, if there's criminality involved, then that is where the justice system, specifically in this case, the civil system, takes those matters. But I think for my colleagues, no matter how you feel about this issue, I feel terrible for you and what has happened in the culture at the Washington Redskins. We have to make sure that we don't become the arbiters of deciding how these things are going to be handled inside individual institutions. If there was going to be a committee where these accusations were actually going to be handled, if you want to take a look at what federal law might be, it actually wouldn't be this committee. It would be the committee that meets next door, Judiciary, or maybe Education and Labor, that actually deals with labor practices. And so I really wanted to come down here to express both sides of a very terrible issue. One, the report should be made public. The NFL should absolutely do that. But two, just as well, and this is much more for my colleagues and frankly not for the witnesses, is that we have to be careful about how we wield the power of Congress. Because if Congress decides that they're going to engage themselves in the actions of every business or every community, regardless of whatever our powers actually are under the United States Constitution, then we actually limit the authority of Congress, and we actually undo the authority that we are here to actually wield under the U.S. Constitution.
Thank you. Now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Krishnamurthy. I would like to thank all our witnesses for being here today. No one should ever have to be employed in a toxic work environment. More importantly, sexual harassment is a behavior that our society has determined is antithetical to a professional work environment. No one should ever have to face that either at work or elsewhere. And I appreciate the courage it took to tell your stories, and I hope you're able to find peace and healing. While I appreciate the opportunity to hear these stories, I would remind the majority that sexual harassment has been illegal for decades and that Congress is not the proper forum.
Okay. So we may have to wrap up soon here, but I mean, this is fascinating. So much has come out of it. So just to review really quick, there's been a call by several Congress people for the criminal law enforcement authorities and the district attorney to investigate some of the claims of sexual harassment or sexual assault that took place. It's unclear, with the timing, whether that would be barred by the statute of limitations in certain districts or whether that could move forward. Sometimes when you discover new information, it can lengthen the amount of time that you'd be able to investigate and bring a case. And then there's been a call for the resignation of Roger Goodell by at least one congressperson and by one of the people that testified. There's going to be a bill for a national commission on sexual harassment. There's a bill to try to prevent non-disclosures from being signed in the workplace to prevent people from coming forward to silence them. There's now the biggest thing I would say, Nick and Megan, is several people have said that there needs to be a congressional examination of the NFL's tax exempt status. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I absolutely think so, because they received benefit when they needed it. And now we see the NFL holistically as one of the most profitable entities probably in the world. Also, I wanted to mention for anyone listening, the Super Bowl is coming up next week. That's one of the top sex trafficking events in the world. There's an issue here when it comes to the objectification of women. So that's a separate thing there. My hope from all of this is that this allows for everyone to hear what has gone on, and they do set a hearing date.
Well, I'll say this, Congress has an opportunity to step in and rectify a lot of issues that are ongoing. And I don't know if you guys could hear me before, but it bothers me to hear congressperson after congressperson talk about the other underlying issues that are taking place in this country. So this is not an important issue. Every issue is important. Or do we have a laundry list of things that we have to do? We have to do those in our own household, but we find a way to address every single one. And you may see that one is more of a priority than another, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have to have the right to address them. But these are strong allegations coming from testimony from these women who've had to endure this for a substantial amount of time. We just can't push things to the side. This is how, think about it, this is how we got here in the first place. The idea is that, well, this is too small of an issue to even address. So if we want to make sure that there is proper workplace conduct, we have to first start by addressing some of these issues.
Received. Very good. The NFL's announcement included several recommendations to strengthen its protection of workers in teams across the league. This is back in 2018. One recommendation was, quote, a specific prohibition of using NDAs to limit reporting of potential violations or cooperation in league investigations under the personal conduct policy. Ms. Engelson, you left the Washington football team in 2019 after the NFL issued its recommendations. Were you aware of a requirement that misconduct in the workplace should be reported to the NFL?
No, I was not.
Ms. Nunes, You also left the Washington football team that same year in 2019. So after the recommendations were made, after the Carolina Panthers investigation. When you left the team, were you asked to sign an NDA?
To my knowledge, I signed release papers.
Another recommendation was, quote, a specific requirement that claims of workplace misconduct issues be reported to the league office under the personal conduct policy. Ms. Engelson, were you aware of this policy?
No, I was not aware of this policy. It was not disseminated at all in the Washington football team.
Finally, the NFL was recommended to, and I quote, establish a hotline or other system to allow league and club employees to report issues of workplace misconduct on a confidential basis. Ms. Nunez, were you aware of such a hotline or system to report issues of workplace conduct on a confidential basis?
I was not.
So this has been a past issue and it's a current issue. It is no surprise that you were not aware of these reporting mechanisms because it appears that the NFL failed to implement them. 3 years later, history is already repeating itself. After the NFL's investigation of WFT, the NFL stated that it would implement, and I quote, a requirement that all club employees have the ability anonymously to report issues of workplace conduct to their club or the NFL. The NFL holds itself to a higher standard, yet it has repeatedly shirked its responsibility to keep workers safe. It is up to Congress to get to the bottom of why. Let me just repeat. The NFL released reports on Ray Rice, the Carolina Panthers, Deflategate, but nothing with regard to the Washington football team sexual harassment scandal. Now, I just want to make a few final comments here. Some of my colleagues have repeatedly acknowledged your pain. They've said that you have suffered horrific harm. But unfortunately, they say that workplace misconduct in this committee being examined is a big waste of time. That the issue of sexual harassment in one of the most prominent workplaces in this country and a cover-up on behalf of a powerful owner is simply not worth congressional oversight is absolutely wrong. The issue of sexual harassment is absolutely within the purview of this committee. And I'm so grateful for you coming here and sharing your stories again. And it's very painful. Obviously, you've provided very emotional testimony, and many of us were moved to just hearing it. I want to just say finally, today we've heard repeatedly of sexual harassment, not just from employees, not just from middle management, but we've heard about sexual harassment by Dan Snyder, the team owner himself. And anyone who saw the Washington Commanders announcement of the team name yesterday saw that he was part of the decision-making with regard to that particular issue as well. He is front and center in the decision-making of that team, even today, despite having presided over pervasive sexual harassment and committed sexual harassment against Ms. Johnston and others himself. Ms. Johnston shared how Dan Snyder himself sexually touched her without her consent at a work dinner and then tried to push her into his limo. Ms. Coburn told us how Dan Snyder ogled at cheerleaders through binoculars during auditions and used women as, quote, sex objects and tools to increase sales. Ms. Applegate's boss told her not to wear flats because he, quote, liked the way her body looked better in high heels. Ms. Engelson's harasser humiliated her regularly at marketing meetings. Ms. Nunez's older colleague texted her suggestively about the, quote, things he would do to her. I'm so sorry you endured all this. And that's just a sampling of the outrageous behavior we heard today. And when these women reported their harassment time and again, they were almost always ignored or told to just shut up. In fact, there was no functional HR department and no system for reporting sexual harassment at WFT. And as Ms. Engelson told you, When the team finally hired executives who tried to protect employees from harassment, those executives were quickly fired. Neither the WFT nor the NFL ever did anything to protect these women, despite NFL supposedly holding itself to a, quote, higher standard. And that's why we stepped in, to protect these victims, to protect victims all across the country, and to hold the rich and powerful accountable. And as I said earlier, today is the beginning, not the end. Today is when we start holding WFT and NFL accountable for the harassment, accountable for the cover-ups. The buck stops here. Okay, we have one last person who just showed up for questions. Ms. Talib, are you there? Ms. Talib? I'm not sure if she can hear me.
All right, I think they're about to wrap up. I don't know if this person is a former employee of the Washington football team who just showed up. I think they're going to wrap this up now. But we're going to post this on YouTube, and hopefully there'll be a lot of comments. And then I'm going to get it. And as Congressman Krishnamurthy is saying, this is a bipartisan issue, and hopefully this will attract a lot of public attention. I'm going to put it on YouTube, and I'm going to get this over to the congressional representatives, Representative Maloney's office, so that she can see some of the comments here. Does anybody from the audience want to join? They could do a quick knock and make any comments or any suggestions on things that could be useful to people on Capitol Hill to hear from just the everyday person in the work environment. If you do, you just knock. Kind of a cool feature. I'll give it like 30 seconds. Nick, do you want to say anything in closing, and Megan in closing? Because I think we're going to sign off soon.
Well, I'll say this in closing, that listening to the testimony, obviously it should shake you to your core, especially if you are a father or a mother, because these women could be your child going through this and figuring out, hey, listen, I've gone through a traumatizing experience, but I have no outlet. I have no one to actually go to. And everyone that I've gone to has told me to just kind of keep my mouth shut, because for me being an athlete, it is like someone telling me, speaking out about social injustice issue, like I view this one, shut up and dribble, right? Just like, well, you want me to use my platform just to talk about things related to sports, but when I'm using my platform to talk about issues that involve people who look like me or people who I know, now you want me to be silenced. And that's a tough pill to swallow, that you're only being told you can only speak about these situations on these particular platforms. And I think that that's entirely wrong. And we all have an obligation when we see something taking place to speak up about it, because things have been allowed to take place. Like Megan mentioned about trafficking. I mean, I've spoken up on child trafficking, when I lived in Los Angeles. And if we don't speak up about these things, it's like, well, who else will? And having, these congressmen and women say, well, we have bigger fish to fry. This is part of what you signed on to help the public with, right? If you're not going to help them reshape and reform policy, why did you take that post to begin with? People are saying, I need your help. If there are no outlets, there are no individuals to help them, their voices fall on deaf ears. That's why I saw Megan, get as emotional as she did, because she is just reflecting on these times where these things were happening, but no one would listen. I mean, that is an inherent problem, and we all have an obligation to do something about it.
I think you're spot
Absolutely.
on, Nick. And I would just say, too, myself included, along with other people that I know, and my phone, I'm sorry, it's been blowing up the whole time, but a lot of us actually left professional sports entirely, and we were successful despite our circumstances working there. And I think that's such a shame. So much talent lost, dreams left on the table for a lot of people, too. And all of us, we never thought that this would see the public light of day as it is now, with the courage of someone like Emily Applegate that led me to think it's going to create a domino effect, and that's exactly what has happened. And unfortunately, it has to hit Congress to try to make some of this the headways, and really, I would just encourage anybody listening that you're not alone in this. And I think we're so much at the forefront of the beginning of this Me Too era. I mean, that movement really only started in 2017, and then now you're mixing Black Lives Matter with Me Too and professional sports. Like, we really need to get ahead of this now. And to your point, Nick, and Amy Trask said this too, we can't let this moment go by. We need to address it head on and handle it in order for people to not get hurt. And we're talking about emotional damage, trauma. We're not just talking about, inequity of pay, although that's an issue too, right? But this is like legit trauma that is impacting people for the rest of their lives. Thank you for having me. I know this is not my A game today.
So much. No, that's great. I appreciate all of your comments. Awesome. And hopefully we can do a lot more of these. That's sort of the plan with League of Justice. We want interactive live streaming where everyone can become part of the conversation, so we can propose solutions from people going through this, people who have actually experienced it. Up on Capitol Hill, a lot of people are so far removed from what it's like. Maybe people have had personal experiences, but I think, these types of stories and the active involvement of the public and the people who went through it can really help to change the laws. So that's the point here. I love the suggestion by somebody about if you can't go to HR, where can you go? I think we need a solution like that. Is there a legal mechanism? Is there an independent commission? Where can we go?
Amy, one last comment. As my phone and text, there's a few people even mentioning like Melanie being at the owner's place in Aspen and those kinds of things. They're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know she was there. I heard stories about that. So my hope also, by this very public witness statements, we might see more people come through for us and talk and corroborate and bring forth more truth. So that's my hope too, is encouraging people that now is the time to come forth with what you know.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you, Nick, so much. Do you have anything else to add? I think you had a pretty powerful ending statement there. You might want to go out with that.
No, you know what? Thanks for having me on once again. Megan, thanks for your strength and your courage. Pass that along to everyone that's involved with this situation, because once again, if no one brings up these accounts of what has happened to them, no one will really know. And we can't be a culture based on silence. And I know, once again, going back to the question I asked you at the very beginning, this isn't about cancel culture. This is about changing the culture to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity. And someone who's not down for that, I'm not down for them. So it's all about making this, I guess, the best opportunity for each individual to live the best life they can. So please give that message to all those amazing people who've started to come forward. And Mr. Baker, man, just having a man involved in a situation like this kind of, I hope, turn the tables, and we'll have more men to come forward about any situation, not just this one.
Yeah, definitely. So this will be on YouTube. Some people asking me, will the next discussion be Brian Flores lawsuit? Yes, I need a little time to get that panel together. Nick, maybe you're going to come back for that. I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully you'll want to.
Yes, of course. I'll definitely be back for that one, Amy.
All right. And we'll stay on top of this one too. Thank you, Megan. Did you have something you wanted to say? Okay.
No, I'm good. Thank you so much. I would just like to hear the end. Maybe we'll get a hearing date out here soon. That'd be awesome.
Definitely. All right. See you guys. Everyone have a great day, and thanks for everyone who joined.